We were going to leave the rest of Star Wars for later, but then a horrible co-host pointed out it's the 25th anniversary of the Phantom Menace, so here we are. Has time been kind to it? No, it hasn't. It's even worse than I remembered. Happy Star Wars. Welcome everyone to the Atomic Cinema Experiment. I am Peter, and joining me is David.
I come in peace.
This is a science fiction movie podcast. You come in peace, but you also feel like you're coming in great despair.
I come with this horrible, horrible message of why are we doing this?
This was your idea, you son of a bitch!
No, it was not. All right, I'm getting this out of the way up front because I know you're going to keep pulling this on me. We map out the schedule. We look at all the movies that are coming up, things that we need to get around to eventually. Pete puts on the docket the prequel trilogy.
Yeah, yes.
It's not for months. It is months down the line. And I say, hey, Pete, the 25th anniversary is literally the week this is going out. Like, now, let's bump it up so we can have it ready for that. And he says, good idea, David. That's such a smart idea. I respect you in all of your decisions.
None of those things sound like things I say. None of them sound like things I would say.
So doing this earlier, yes, that's on me. But doing it at all, that's on you, bro.
Look, I had them loosely slotted in 2025, right? Next year, pie in the sky. Just purely because when we eventually have a new Star Wars movie out, I want to have all the previous ones done. And if the prequel trilogy is a little package has already been done, it means at worst case scenario, we only have the 5 newer movies to do in time for a new release. That was the idea. But it was your idea to put Phantom Menace into 2024.
Yep.
Right? And even when you made this decision, it was maybe only like a month ago, maybe, if that. So,
well, I didn't keep track of the fact it was a 25th anniversary until I saw something that was like an ad saying 25 years later. I'm like, oh, right. It's a big number now.
Yeah, because we're old. Yes, we're all aware of this. We're old.
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, it's a sci-fi movie podcast, and me and Tara already did the original Star Wars trilogy, so that's out the way. David didn't get to do the good ones. He's here for the rest of them, though. So this episode, we are looking at Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. We will start spoiler-free, of course, as we always do, even though I imagine most people don't care or have seen it or whatever. But still, we'll stick to the format. We'll start spoiler-free.
You're not going to believe what happens to this Anakin kid.
Well, to be fair, even when it came out, that wasn't a spoiler because it's a prequel. Like, you go in with the that's why you shouldn't show the movies to a new person in chronological order. You show them in order of release, because the whole point of these is that they're prequels, and you're meant to go in with the knowledge of the later films. That's what makes it a prequel. You don't look at Terminator 1 and say it's a prequel to Terminator 2. That's not accurate. It's not.
No, and not getting too deep into it yet, since we have barely started. I think this movie acknowledges that. I don't think there's anything where they're like, oh yeah, you're not supposed to know what happens to the characters here. Like, they say, yeah, clearly you've seen the originals, and we're just gonna run with it.
Yes, but I don't know why you're saying that as a positive. We'll talk about that later.
Okay. Fair enough.
But anyway, before we start, I'll just remind you, if you're enjoying the show, hit the like button on YouTube. It helps us out a lot. You can, share us on your podcast apps, rate us on your podcast apps, whatever it is you do. And you can also support us over at Patreon. I'll tell you more about this at the end, but we do some bonus monthly shows over on Patreon. So look forward to that. But we'll get into it. Star Wars. Now, this is the only prequel I had seen more than once. I'd seen this, I think, twice. That said, though, the last time was still over 20 years ago, I'm pretty sure. So it'd been a long time. And I want to preface everything that we're about to say, everything that we are going to say on this film, I want to preface it with this. In my memory, this was the best prequel.
Okay. I mean, that's a strong statement, but okay.
This does not bode well for episode 2 and 3, David. It does not bode well at all.
Are you saying you're not enjoying the masterful dialogue, the CGI that holds up years after the fact? Jar Jar Binks?
Look, this movie was far more painful to actually sit through than I was expecting it to be. I thought, oh, it'll be an easy watch at least. It's still a mainstream Star Wars movie. It's so fucking boring.
Yeah.
I cannot believe the first thing that comes up in the text crawl, the Star Wars text crawl, the first paragraph says there's a dispute about the taxation of trade routes. And I'm like, I'm sorry. Yeah. Even at the script level, did no one look at what that was going to say and thought, this doesn't sound like an exciting Star Wars adventure. This sounds like some sort of diplomatic bullshit.
Yeah.
Oh,
I was thinking the exact same thing the whole way through, because I mean, I'll spoil this straight up because I'm not going to be able to hide it the whole way through. Yes. I do homework. I do homework for these movies. I watch something that Tara and them have already watched. I did Empire for this.
Uh-huh.
To have those watched so closely together, like everything this movie did, I'm like, no wonder people hated this right out the gate. Like, people probably watched the original trilogy, went straight to the theater, watched this, and were like, what the hell was that? Why did I just watch all this stuff about signing a treaty? Why, I don't give a damn about a treaty.
Even just having them relatively fresh in my memory, because we did the original trilogy last year, right, over the course of the year. Like, it was like spring, summer, and like like even just having them vaguely like recent in my mind made this much worse, because there's none of the character, none of the personalities, none of the excitement, none of the anything. It's so devoid of anything. Like, there's no spark of life. It's so soulless. It's wild. It's a truly fascinating piece of media, not a piece of art. Let's not call it that, because I do not believe it is. But as a piece of media to analyze and say, how did it become this bad? How did a mainstream thing the common belief, I think, is that George Lucas was untouchable and no one could say no to him.
Oh, yeah.
And that's the reason why. And because he's maybe not actually an auteur, it didn't work out. And that's true for a lot of people. Honestly, a lot of filmmakers need to be reined in a bit. There's probably very few who actually, if you really give them an unlimited budget and let them off the leash, they'll create nothing but gold. There's probably some truth to needing some restrictions and so on, right? The problem, though, is usually there's too many restrictions, that the studio's too like controlling and whatever. That's usually the story that comes out of these things. This almost single-handedly justifies why studios are controlling with directors, because this is a painful watch. And to anyone who says, the prequels are better, understood now, they've aged better, they're respected in time, like there's a new appreciation for them now, you are fooling yourselves. This movie is trash. The next two are definitely also trash. They are garbage. There is really bad movies I would rather watch again than watch this again, right? Like I'm going to say it, right? Every Michael Bay Transformers movie is more entertaining than this.
Yeah, I can get that.
Every single one. And some of those are terrible. Like, they are terrible. But they're still better than this.
So, I just want to go back to one of the first things you said there, because apparently I haven't drawn enough of Pete's ire. I just need to level it on a bit more. You've watched this twice now? Maybe 3 times?
This is my third time watching this one.
Third time. I have watched not just this movie, but the prequel trilogy more than I've seen the original trilogy. And that is solely because I was the age group. I was 100% who they were gunning for. I was 6 years old when this first one came out, and I didn't know. I just wasn't aware that it was bad. I was like, oh, okay. I mean, I don't understand what all this stuff is about the trade negotiations or whatnot, but like, ooh, look at the laser sword and all the droids or whatnot. I remember loving the droids. I remember thinking that they were like so fun. And then I watched this movie back and I'm like, oh, they literally are like the bare essentials to have an antagonist force.
I mean,
like, that is minimum.
I was 10, so I was kind of in the target audience for this first one, at least.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I watched that a second time soon after, maybe the DVD came out, whatever, I don't know. And then I think by the time Clones came out, because that was 2004, that would have been? No, 2002.
Yeah.
2002.
Yeah, it was earlier than that, yeah.
2002, then 2005 was the last one. By 2002, though, I was 13. So I was kind of like starting to, I actually realize when things are bad now. Like, I'm starting to get to that age. And I remember I didn't even go to the cinema to see the second one. I caught it when it hit the movie channels, because back then, obviously, you still had cable and movie channels. Well, I know some old people still do, but
yeah,
I don't. So, and I remember just thinking the second one was boring, and I eventually saw the third one just to tick it off, okay, I've seen them all now. But, again, I waited. I saw it sometime later after it came out. When this came out, though, I was interested, at least. Like, I actually was young enough to be interested just because it looked big and colorful and whatever.
Right.
But yeah, this movie does not hold up in any way, shape, or form. You mentioned the CG. The CG in this movie has dated horrendously.
Yeah.
There's so flat looking.
It definitely is. There's certain aspects to it that I can actually, like, appreciate the fact of, like, okay, they were doing their best. They did, like, what they could. I think the starships themselves look fine. They aren't great, but it's literally the easiest thing to do because it doesn't need to have any physics or reflections or anything.
It's the
it just
aliens.
needs to be space. Yeah, the aliens are the problem here. And also, this is the beginning of George Lucas saying, like, wait a minute, we could just put everything on a blue screen. Great, awesome. And then they just did that for, like, everything. And I think the biggest problem I have with this is I could see the cutouts. I could see the little, like, grading line of them trying to, like, blur away the little blue screen artifacts on every single character the whole way through. Anytime they were in front of a blue screen, I could tell very specifically that they were.
Yeah, and on just visual quality, this is, again, I watched the original trilogy last year in 4K. Now, obviously, yes, it would be nice to actually watch the original versions. You still have to put up with those little additions that you added. But by and large, it's still the original movies, and they were shot in film, and film that has been properly remastered and transferred to 4K looks fantastic. It can look fantastic. Now, I did a bit of Googling as I was watching this, because I was 15, 20 minutes in, and I was like, why does this look kind of shit? Like, it doesn't look that good. I'm not talking about the CG. I mean, obviously that looks shit, but, like, I'm just talking about the image quality. I'm like, why does this not look that good compared to the original trilogy? And then I vaguely remembered, oh yeah, weren't these shot in, like, HD, like, video? They were digital, like, 1080p, so technically they're already capped out for resolution years ago. And I googled. Apparently, this first one, a quick Google, this first one was shot in film still, but 2 and 3 were shot in, like, 1080p digital.
Okay.
But I think because there's so many effect shots, and because of whatever resolution they did the effects at, I think this is still limited by that. So it actually looks visually worse than the older movies. The older movies hold up better because they were shot in film. And it's one of these things where this is right at the dawn of this new age of technology and people shooting digital. And the truth is that a lot of the early stuff that was shot digitally has aged poorly because they did it before the resolutions were there to actually, be comparable to a good bit of film. Like, 35mm film looks really good. Like, if it's shot well, it looks, and preserved, it looks fantastic. And then the other problem, of course, is that movies with effects, at least up until very recently, if not still with a lot of big movies, they're edited and the effects are done at 2K, which is bigger than 1080p by a bit, but it's not as big as 4K. And all the 4K versions you get of a lot of these, like, modern Marvel movies and things like that are actually upscaled from the 2K version because that's how they mastered them. And it's still beneficial. You still, there's still a bit more resolution there, but you get the higher bit rate. You get obviously the HDR. If there's other things you're getting from it other than just the resolution. But because of that, the 4K remasters of older things like Jaws, which are just shot in film and there's no CG, those things, like, remaster amazingly into 4K. Like, they're better showpieces for 4K setups than a lot of the modern stuff is, because the modern stuff has this kind of, like, cap on it almost.
Right.
So, that's just a wider picture of this. But this movie, I'm like, this doesn't look that good. just when it's just a shot of actors, it doesn't look as good as the older movies do. And that's just image quality. I also think it's not as well directed cinematography-wise either. Like, I don't think it's as engaging. It's not as visually stimulating as the classic movies.
Yeah, here's the thing. Again, don't want to get too much into my thoughts on it, but with having watched Empire, there are so many, like, striking shots in that. There's so many, like, high contrast or, like, super interesting setups for how they were filming that stuff. This movie, again, it feels like it was specifically tailored that every single shot had to have like the same kind of lighting because that's how the blue screens were set up. Like they couldn't change too much about it because otherwise that would mess with the special effects department and have to make them do extra work.
That comes back to a word that I use for the CG, but I can use it for this as well. It looks flat because there's no drama in the lighting. There's no moody lighting anywhere, which is really weird because when any other movie, even like a kid's movie, you'll still have a couple of scenes at least where there's some sort of shadows. You know, everything's so clinical in a really kind of dull way. And I think, you know, the biggest problem though, like we're talking about a lot of technical things here. Oh, cinematography, you know, isn't really just technical. That's also art. That's art as well. But to go back to the story here for a second, obviously we were joking about the whole tax, you know, trade route bollocks that the movie, the entire premise of the movie is based around. So if I said to you, right, give me the plot of the original Star Wars, you would probably say, oh, Princess Leia is held captive by an evil villain who works for the Empire, who's like this evil dictator force, and a group of heroes band together, and they're kind of a ragtag group, but they end up getting in to save her, and all. But you know, you sort of describe, you can kind of sum up what Star Wars is, right? Quite quickly. If I say to you, give me just the gist, what's the plot of the Phantom Menace?
I'd have to give it at least 3 different plots. Like there's the Trade Federation stuff and like all the Galactic Senate. There's the Anakin Skywalker stuff and all that going on. And then there's whatever the hell Jar Jar Binks is on in the background. Like it's at least 3 different things going on and none of them are simple.
Yeah, I was really thinking about it in the third act of this movie. Well, one, because I feel like the third act has like no weight or stakes because they've barely, like, everything kind of hinges on, the evil Trade Federation is going to do bad things to Naboo and possibly the Gungans, which I think is what Jar Jar Binks' race is called. But you've not given me any people in either of these civilizations to care about. They keep talking about our people are being hurt, our people are being killed. You don't see a single scene of anyone being even like pinched, never mind killed.
I loved seeing the droid army like invading the capital city of Naboo, and the streets are just empty. There's not a soul on them, and I'm like, yeah, this is a bustling city, all right.
Yeah. There's no one to care about. They don't give you anything. So I think that's a big problem. I think the characters themselves are so, you know, it'd be very easy to refer back to Red Letter Media's reviews of these movies, like, constantly. But the one thing that I do want to bring up, because I think it's an excellent point that is made in their reviews, they do a whole bit where they sort of ask some people who are, you know, all people involved with the channel, admittedly, but they ask them, hey, describe a character from Star Wars, and they'll say Han Solo, and they go, oh, he's cocky, he's brash, he thinks too highly of himself, but he gets himself in trouble, but he's got a heart of gold. Like, you can describe him with, you know, beyond just you can describe what he does, which he's a smuggler, but they specifically say, no, describe the characteristics of Han Solo. Right. And then you say, okay, describe the characteristics of Qui-Gon Jinn. And they just sort of look blankly at the camera like he's stoic, I guess.
Yeah, like there's a lot of people in this movie, especially like Obi-Wan and the Jedi Council and stuff, who eventually get to the point of saying like, oh, Qui-Gon, he's constantly like going up against the Council's wishes, and he's like a maverick in his own right. And I'm like, where is that character?
Yeah, we've not seen that.
Who are you talking
movie
about?
Yeah.
Like, yes, his actions, I guess, kind of work that way, but his like personality, the way he's acting, is the exact same as every other character. And honestly, that's kind of what I want to get to in this, is that George Lucas should not be in charge of actors, just period.
Oh, yes.
Like there's no point in this where George should be, because that's even something when I went back and watched New Hope, because obviously he directed that one. For vast swaths of it, they're all just so whiny and annoying, if that's the best way to say it. Like, especially early movie Luke, but even then, as it progresses through the movie as well, there's so much of this that just doesn't feel like a normal, here's how a person would talk. It feels like this is how this person has to talk in order to get my scene to, like, happen the way I want it to.
Somehow I think it gets over that in that first movie, though, because I still think it's the best one.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I get what you're saying. I think here, though, you look at these characters and they're so devoid of personality by and large. Like, I hear people talk fondly about, well, yeah, the prequels aren't very good, but I really like Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan. And I'm watching this movie and I'm like, why? Why? He's barely got a character.
It's nothing, not here. It's all in the later movies. I guarantee you.
Yeah, there's nothing here. Anakin is just annoying, right? Padme, again, much like the others, has no personality. I mean, and then who else really is there to really talk about?
Jar Jar and Anakin.
Well, I mentioned Anakin.
Yeah, but I mean, like, the more annoying parts of Anakin. I'll be honest, if this is the part where I really was going to come down on George, is that there is no less than 5 times in this movie where characters, when they are happy, literally say, yippee! Don't. No, at no point in space history has there ever been someone who has genuinely uttered, yippee! When they have something good happen.
Yeah, his dialogue is trash. There's several scenes in this where it does that almost really, like, almost the Room level of dialogue, where someone will have to or ask a question to get something explained. It's like, hey, for the audience, can you give a bunch of exposition? And they'll say it in the most, like, and we'll do it with Anakin, and I guess you get away with that a little bit because he's a kid. Right. But, like, the scene where he asks about midichlorians is so painful to listen to.
I've heard Qui-Gon. What are midichlorians?
I've heard you talk about these midichlorians. What are midichlorians, Qui-Gon? Explain it to me, please. You've got all of these things, but the reason why I even like Star Wars, right? The original Star Wars, the reason why I like it is because the 3 main characters, Han, Luke, and Leia, have such good chemistry, the way they bounce off of each other, and they go on an adventure. And it's why, despite the fact that I do think Empire is very, very good, I like it less than the original one because they're kind of split up. You know, Luke's separate from them for a lot of the movie. Right. And I like their chemistry together. So this is a Star Wars with nothing but cardboard characters. There's nothing to them. They are blank slates. And then let's pivot this into another big discussion point, and this is something that's come up a lot over the last 25 years, right? Because this is the most famous prequel, but prequels suck. And one of the reasons why prequels suck is because you take things that were mentioned in the original thing and you say, oh, well, wouldn't this be so cool if we actually show a lot of this stuff? Wouldn't it be cool if we actually see a Jedi Council? Oh, yeah, it's so exciting seeing Yoda and Samuel L. Jackson sitting around just being kind of like moany about things for some reason. Like,
I did find that weird in New Hope when Alex Guinness literally said, and then Samuel L. Jackson spoke up.
But, like, it's so, like, everything in this that is just there. Like, you know, I mean, I got a mild spoiler, I guess, but did you know Darth Vader as a child built C-3PO? Like,
yeah,
piss off. Just
honestly,
piss off.
The C-3PO and the R2-D2 stuff I felt was the most like, oh no, they've been here all along. Like, we have to be able to work that. It felt like Batman finding like 800 things in the alley where his parents died. You know, like everything happened that night. That's where it needed to happen. Yeah. And this just feels like every single thing that you know about Star Wars happened on this one trip from Naboo to Tatooine. That's it.
It's that prequel thing where we have to over-explain things, and the bigger problem from that is that this doesn't enhance the original movies. If anything, this now has to be something you have to actively eject from your brain because it just diminishes the original movies. Because things in the original movies don't feel as special anymore when you actually break down and start explaining things as much as this. Like, sometimes backstory should just be backstory.
The way that I viewed this, and I don't know George Lucas's headspace. Obviously, it was, I need another buttload of money. But I think with the long gap between Return of the Jedi to this coming out, obviously the only things that were getting made were the ancillary materials. They were the novels that tied in. There were comic books. They were like the rare occasional like cartoon or something we'd have. There was not anything that was mainline continuity. And like you said, all of these sort of things, the way that they function is they take a tiny little mention and they either expand on what happens later to that or what happened before. We got before episode 2 came out, there were tons of books that were trying to explain, here's what the Clone Wars were. Here's what an entire thing was, because it was mentioned in an offline in New Hope, and people ran with that. They let their imaginations go free. And I think that's kind of the problem George Lucas came up against, is that every single thing that he was subjected to related to Star Wars for over a decade was this explaining of things, was this like, here's how this happened, here's how that happened. And I think it kind of messed with his brain of saying like, well, clearly that's what the people want. That's what I need to do. And so he went back and he just explained all of this stuff. Now, obviously, by the time that episode 5 came out, it was called episode 5. He always had an idea that he wanted to do like prequels eventually, but I think that that level of explaining things, of having to go through each individual detail rather than just tell a nice story within its own right, that's because of the books.
I see what you're saying. Arguably, the fan base became obsessed with details. You know, there's people who know what make and model Han Solo's blaster is and shit like that. And I've never cared about any of that. That's not what made Star Wars good. Star Wars was good because it was a fun adventure with great characters. And yeah, there was some good cinematography. There was great practical effects. It was a kind of a world you'd never really seen before in movies. There's a lot of reasons why those movies worked, that original trilogy. And this boils down to, oh no, we have to explain a lot of details because that's what the sort of details that fans have been obsessing about. And whether George was influenced externally by that or he himself became enamored with the details of like all the lore that it kind of spun out of like the original scripts he'd written long ago, I don't know. But regardless, this is the least interesting form of storytelling. It's just filling in gaps. And this is the thing. This feels less like a story and more like a series of like, it's more of it feels like a checklist. Like, see, when I'm watching this movie, I don't feel a story that has momentum flowing from bit to bit. And that's a big problem that comes up for me a lot in this, is that even the third act, we only have the third act because Padme decides she wants to go back to the planet. Nothing actually motivates that decision. She just wants to, and that sets up her entire third act sequences.
And honestly, that's I think I could pin down every time, like mentally, I checked out of this film a little bit, and that's any time the two Trade Federation like alien guys showed up on screen, because all of their scenes just revolve around the fact of like, oh, well, this thing is now happening, and this is how the Trade Federation is going to react to the Republics, and it's just like, I don't care. I don't care about any of this. And I will give the smallest bit of credit here in that I think from a world building perspective, showing from like, this is the initial thing that will domino into the Empire becoming a thing, I think that that's smart. I like to see how these small little threads eventually build up and turn into this major conflict. But an interesting movie that does not make. That is not something like like you said, if the first line of the crawl is trade disputes and taxation, it's like, why are we turning this into a movie? This should be back matter material at best.
Like, if you want to make a movie about the Emperor, like, playing political games and doing that movie, there's probably a good version of that you could tell. But this movie, like, you know, it's barely a subplot. Like, it's just kind of there in the background happening.
Especially because by the end of the movie, like, what does it really accomplish? Like, without spoiling anything, it's like, it's kind of just dealt with. And then it's, as much as I say it's a domino that leads into this larger thing, well, it's kind of not.
There's one thing. There is one thing it accomplishes, which I'll save for spoilers, but... Right. But I just... So much of this doesn't really ultimately matter that much. It's all just about, okay, we've got a plot that has nothing to do with Anakin Skywalker, but we have to get to Anakin Skywalker, so here's a series of contrived events that will lead us to him. And then the rest of the movie basically pauses, so we have this big middle chunk that's about Anakin and, like, sort of, you know, Qui-Gon growing connected to him and wanting to bring him on board and whatever. And then there's a little bit of an interlude, and then Padme just wants to go back to the planet she started on, which is all of her third act action stuff. And it just kind of feels like everyone tells her that's a bad idea.
Yeah.
But she insists, and yeah, you know, so
here's the thing about Padme as a character. She pretends like she has this agency, which is like, oh, I need to save my people. My people are under attack from the Trade Federation. But like, if you really watch her scenes, she is the biggest pushover out of any characters in these movies, because all it takes is somebody coming up and saying like, well, that seems like an awfully bad idea. And she's like, you're right. I'm not going to do that. To the point where you saying that she doesn't have like a reason for going back to her home planet. Everyone says it's a bad idea. Her reasoning is Jar Jar speaks up and says, oh, people are going to be dying on Naboo. And she's like, you're right. Jar Jar says go back to the planet. Let's go, everybody.
Yeah, I mean, because you have a trio of characters in the original movie. I guess your trio in this is Obi-Wan, but he feels very secondary in this one. Obviously, he becomes more of a prominent character in the next two.
Mm-hmm.
I guess Qui-Gon, instead of him in this case, Anakin and Padme are your trio.
Yeah. Well, that's the issue, like you're saying. The plot goes on pause for a while so that we can have the extended Anakin bit in the middle. And that makes it feel like that's the core plot. That is the core thing that we should be caring about.
And then by the time you come back to the other stuff, it's like, yeah, this is about trade federations, and they're invading Naboo, which we'd never heard of before this movie, and you've done nothing to make me care about Naboo. You've given me no characters who live on Naboo who will be affected by this invasion. You've shown me no atrocities whatsoever. In fact, I know it has to be like at most PG-13 because it's a Star Wars movie, right? But like all you've shown me are droids marching. That's it. That's all I've seen is droids marching and accepting orders from two goofy alien dudes who, and I'll be honest, I fell asleep at one point. I started this movie early, right? I started this movie with like 4 hours till record time. I watched about 30 minutes and I was like, I can't take any more of this right now. I'm having a break. So I had an hour.
Okay.
Right? And I went back to watch the movie. I got to about the point where they'd left Tatooine, and then I fell asleep. And when I woke up, I was like, oh, I missed 5 minutes. I'm going to go back and go where I left off from. I missed half an hour. I had to go back half an hour. And that ate up all of my time. By the time I finished this movie, I had 5 minutes till record time between breaks and falling asleep.
So I had like an hour in between there. I gave myself that extra hour, but you're literally coming like, end credits start, and you're like, oh, I'm pissed. Start recording. Let's go.
I'm pissed. I am I'm beyond pissed. And yeah, I mean, just again, to set this up here, right? And I know we've been talking for like 20 minutes already about
whatever.
But to set up a bit of context here, I like the original Star Wars trilogy, but I have never been a Star Wars guy. I have never been someone who cares about the comics or the books or the extended universe. I might enjoy some of the video games if I give them a try at some point, but I'll enjoy them if they're good video games, not because I care about extending Star Wars mythology. Like, I didn't need anything after Return of the Jedi. I would be quite happy for Star Wars to just be dead after that. It would be fine. The story would be over, and we can all live a happy life. But it keeps coming back, and we keep getting more of it, and it's put, you know, I remember it was put in such a pedestal in the 2000s, even after the prequels. It was this pedestal that you couldn't move it from. It was the most important thing in the world. And if anything, the one good thing about Disney buying Lucasfilm and making all these movies is that it feels like it's finally not on that pedestal anymore. It feels like it's just sullied the whole thing enough that people realize Star Wars isn't just always this perfect thing. It is fallible, and therefore, you know, like, and people in general are sick of it. Like, honestly, I am impressed with how quickly, like, the shine of like Disney's era of Star Wars like went away. Like, by the time you know that third movie came out, you know, the Revenge of
the Sith,
Rise of Skywalker. That's the one.
Oh, Disney ones, Rise
Disney
of Skywalker.
Ones. By the time that one came out, it was like, oh, the profits have like halved from the first one, and it's like, yeah, this is how quickly you've. I mean, run into the ground seems harsh when it's still making almost $1 billion, but when the first one made $2 billion, it's quite a jump.
Well,
Yeah.
that's the thing about it being such like a modular franchise. Like, yeah, we have the mainline movies, and that's the episodes. Those are the big money makers. And when that takes a dip, it is noticeable. But then, like, they've announced just within the past few weeks as of recording this, there's a TV show called like The Acolyte or something coming out, and that's supposed to be set like pre-prequel as well. This is the first time that like Disney's going back and doing that. So they're able to do that. It doesn't affect anything of what's coming up or anything that's moving forward. You've got like the Ahsoka TV show, you've got the Mandalorian shows. Everything can exist in its own little pockets within this universe. And
So nothing matters.
yeah, that's the thing. None of them, each of them forward their own individual lore and branch out just a little bit into other things. But for the most part, they can't make any serious major changes, because when that episode 10 does come out, we have to abide by it. We have to say, okay, that's it.
Well,
that's the main continuity.
Which is not to say that you can't have just a completely separate story in the universe that has its own stakes and matters on its own right. It could potentially be the best thing in the entire franchise if they just made a good standalone Star Wars movie that had nothing to do with anything else. But they always have to tie it at least a little bit to everything else, because as much as people say Star Wars is a big expansive universe, you can do anything in it. Yeah, well, why does everything tie to a Skywalker or a Han Solo?
Why
then?
did everything happen in this like 60-year period?
Ah.
We're like, I think they said at one point in at least expanded continuity that like before the Battle of Yavin, where the calendar like reset, we were in like the year 7000 something of like this new Republic era, and yet we're only focused on like the equivalent of the fall of Rome. Show me the rest of Rome, bro. Show me everything else that's going on. I'm interested. You have me interested by your mythology, but you keep on just focusing on this very small subject of it.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm that interested, but...
Well, I guess you were saying that you were never a Star Wars guy. I feel like I'm the same. I don't think I'm really a Star Wars or like a Star Trek kind of guy. I'm just not like huge into fandoms like that. But if I had to come down on one side, it was probably Star Wars. And I think it was solely because, like I said, I was 6 when this came out. And even now, I remember how massive the advertising campaign was. Like, this was the biggest thing when it was coming out. We're finally getting a new Star Wars. It's got all the stuff you want to see. There's R2, there's lightsabers. What's going on here? It's was a massive event. And it enraptured me. I was super into the idea of Star Wars, even though at the age of 6, I didn't understand that Phantom Menace wasn't good. Like, I went in and I saw the pod race scene. I'm like, yeah, all right, Sebulba, that's a thing. But like, looking back on it now, it was just an effective advertising campaign, honestly. It wasn't much substance behind it.
Yeah, it's kind of wild to think that it's been 25 years since this came out now, and that's actually like a lot more than the gap between Return of the Jedi and this coming out is. That gap was only, what, 16 years?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, 1983 to 1999. It's actually not that big. And
No.
I'm sure at the time it felt like, oh, it'd been so long since there was a Star Wars thing, but it's not actually that long.
Well, I mean, put it into perspective. So you had kids that were probably like 7, 8 years old when Return of the Jedi came out. They enjoyed it. They had good time with it.
Sure.
And then 16 years later, they'd be, what, 23, 24? Like, they'd be adults that are able to pay for their own movie tickets now. And they'd be like, sure, yep, let's go to the movies. Let's see what's going on there. I just got back from The Matrix.
Talk about better movies, Jesus Christ.
I don't actually know if Matrix came out before or after this one, but it was at least the same year.
Yeah, I don't know. It may have been later in the year. I don't know if Matrix is a summer thing, whereas this definitely was. This was definitely a summer movie. Yeah. Like I say, prequels suck unless you're Better Call Saul, which just completely nailed it somehow.
But again, that's what I think the biggest thing that you can do with the prequel is pick one thing and really elaborate on that. If you're going to do anything, pick one tiny thing. Don't worry about spreading thin and getting everything covered. I don't need to know where 3PO came from. Just pick one thing.
Pick one thing and tell a worthwhile story with it. tell a worthwhile story that has its own beginning, middle, and end that is satisfying on its own. And even if you never see everything else, it doesn't matter. It'll work on its own. But this movie, and this, we were saying this, we did, obviously we do Collector's Cut, we've been doing the Ghostbusters movies recently. Yep. We're talking about Ghostbusters Afterlife and how that just relies on nostalgia and how it's nothing if you don't care about the original Ghostbusters, because that's all it does is say, hey, remember this thing from Ghostbusters? Doesn't that make you happy? These prequels, this movie, like everything in it that's technically on paper exciting, or maybe did excite some hardcore fans, is only exciting because it's nodding towards what things will be in the original movies. It's saying, hey, this is only exciting because they're saying this kid's got a bit of the dark side in him. Oh, it's because he's going to be Darth Vader. Oh my god. Oh. Like, nothing, the story with him himself in this movie is not compelling. The character's annoying. It's not good. It's just simply not good. And very little of this movie is good. The pacing's kind of weird. Like, it's funny because as much as we were complaining about how it starts off being about this tax thing with a trade dispute, like, I felt like every so often I'd have to actually actively think about, okay, why are they doing this right now? What is the point of this? Like, going back to that original Star Wars, the movie starts with a simple goal. Obviously, it has more beyond that once they get to that point, but the movie, for the first half of it, there's a simple goal in mind. Princess Leia has been taken prisoner, and she needs help, and our unlikely hero has now been motivated, after being reluctant, of course, but he's been motivated to go and help. There's a simple goal. Get to where she is and rescue her. Simple goal. You can always understand it. You never have to think about it too hard. It needs to be explained to you. It's simple, A to B. This movie, you've watched it for 20 minutes and you're like, okay, what's the goal right now? They were here to do some negotiations, but then they tried to kill them. Okay, so what's their goal now? Well, the goal now is to get out of the planet and warn them that there's an army coming. Okay, but what's their goal now? Oh, it's to get to the other side of the planet. Oh, what's the goal now? Like, they just keep not having a clear defined goal, and it keeps changing every time a character changes their mind and says, this is what the plan should be now.
Yeah, I having just watched New Hope super recently, that is one thing that, like, I forgot about from my memories, is how long the opening is before we actually get to Luke. Like, we have the whole thing on the ship with Leia, but then there's a whole bit of, like, R2 and 3PO going through the desert, and they get trapped by Jawas, and then, like, a whole thing into sail. It
starts with something exciting, which is this attack on the ship, right? And the droids just barely get away, and they've got a mission, they've got a goal. Again, simple goal. Deliver a message, right? And then it gives you like a little hook, because, okay, I understand these two droids. They've got a bit of chemistry, they're bouncing off of each other, and that keeps you engaged in what they're doing until you get to Luke. And then it introduces to this sort of young, idealistic character, and it gives you time to get to know him so that you actually maybe want to root for him, that you maybe care about him when something tragic happens to his aunt and uncle, and that motivates him to go and get involved and everything. Like, it takes its time to make you care about each of these things. This movie, within 5 minutes, lightsabers are out, and there's just cutting of droids. There's no... I mean... This is the thing. I remember talking about this in Return of the Jedi, actually, is that the lightsaber fights aren't that impressive from, like, a choreography point of view, but they're very, very good. And the reason why they're very good, one, is cinematography, because the set and the lighting and the big final fight's really good. But two, it's not that they're doing fancy moves, it's that there's emotion behind each of the moves. When Luke's, like, hammering at the lightsaber to try and, like, knock it out of Darth Vader's hand, he's doing it with passion because he cares, because he's angry, and he's fighting his feelings, and there's so much into it. And then you start this movie, and it's, we're twirling things around because light shows. Like, look at the shiny, look at the shiny.
I think that that's possibly the worst move that was done to the Jedi. Obviously, it was there in the original trilogy, but in the original trilogy, the best way to describe what the Jedi were space wizards. Like, yes, they had some level of, like, discipline to them, and Yoda went on a whole bunch about saying, like, oh, you know, fear and hate are dark side, worry about, like, peace and tranquility and stuff like that. But Luke, being our protagonist, who went most of his life without that, he had emotion. He was able to do that stuff. because in the prequels, we have a Jedi Council who explicitly are trained from a very, very, very young age so that as they can be trained not to feel these things, you're left with a entire group whose entire purpose is be as unemotional as possible, which is not a compelling character trait. That's not something that makes sense to follow in a dramatic story because they're just blank.
It almost feels like they're villains. The way they just don't want to do anything. It's really like they just keep thinking of reasons why they shouldn't go down certain paths. Yeah. Actually, on what you were saying, I would actually compare them because obviously a lot of inspiration for these movies came from samurai films, right? Hidden Fortress was a direct inspiration, particularly on the droids. And I'm thinking of some of my favorite samurai movies and how, yeah, obviously they always have their swords on them, right? But some of the best samurai movies, like, you know, it's a big deal if they actually like unsheath the sword, if they actually take it out and try and raise it in violence. Like, you know, think of that movie we did for Criterion Cut, Samurai Rebellion, where it went the whole movie without a fight scene until the last act. But then when they started pulling out the swords, it's because, okay, they really care and they believe in what they're fighting for now. And I'm not saying you have to be that constrained with the lightsaber usage, but it's that way where, like, the first time you see them in this movie, there's like sort of gas in the room, so you can't see them. You just see the light of the lightsabers, and it's like, oh, okay, it's gonna excite everyone because they see the lightsabers. We're at a Star Wars movie, and okay, I get that having that moment, but then all they're doing for like 5 minutes after that is just cutting through droids. There's like nothing. There's no threat. Like the droids can't touch them. Which would be fine, because obviously, yeah, you can start an action movie by showing how badass your character is by giving them what is to them an easier jobs to make them look cool, right? You know, they can go through this hallway through a bad guys and it's barely a thing. But that's where the filmmaking lets it down, because if the choreography and the filmmaking was good, you'd be really impressed because it'd look good. It would look like, oh, they look like badasses because they're just going through these waves of robots like it's nothing. But instead, they're just cutting through them like butter in really uninteresting ways, and I'm like, I don't feel anything from this.
I mean, I would also throw it down. The alternate path there is that they're cutting through all these droids, but then all of a sudden, special droids show up, and they're like, oh, well, we can't possibly deal with that. So then they just have to run away. So it's simultaneously... we can't just gloss over that. I know what you're saying, yeah.
Do Jedi have flash powers all of a sudden? Because they zoom out of that scene.
Straight up, they do. There is a power called force speed, and this is the only time it's ever used.
Why don't they use that any other time? Like right before they get stabbed with a lightsaber, for example, that may or may not come up during this movie.
I'm also going to just use that exact same argument. I'm going to say it now, and when we get to it in like 3 years' time, episode 9 with force healing, there's a certain moment in this movie I really think could have benefited from that.
Oh, all right. Okay, let's just say spoilers and start work, because we're kind of already talking about the opening stuff now anyway.
We are.
All right, so spoilers for Phantom Menace. You've been warned, everyone.
John Williams is good. Regardless of anything else going on, John Williams, still good.
John Williams, still good. Still good. Although, I will say, I do find Duel of the Fates is a bit overrated. People put it on a bit of a pedestal.
I'm sorry, I'm a mark for it. I like it too much.
Maybe it's just because it's attached to a fight scene that I think is shit, but, you know.
That's fair. I take the song on its own. To be fair, when it was playing in the movie, I was like, oh, wait, they're editing it. Like, I can hear, like, them adding in different, like, bits to it that aren't on the official track, because I just listen to the official track if I want to hear it. I don't turn on the fight scene to see it.
Oh, obviously, of course.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think the main themes are better, you know, but, you know, it's whatever. But I'm not going to sit here and argue that John Williams, like, obviously he's basically the only thing in this movie you can look at and say objectively still good.
Yes, absolutely.
Because everything else isn't. Everything, like, some people may argue for some of it, but I'll fight them on them. I'll fight them on everything else.
I'll throw punches.
Oh dear. Yeah. All right. So, our two Jedi, Qui-Gon Jinn and his apprentice Obi-Wan Kenobi, or only Wan Kenobi, as I might call him from time to time.
Okay.
I don't know why. I just, for whatever reason, I don't know if I heard that somewhere, but like,
I would imagine it was somewhere in the 10 hours of Red Letter Media where he was just throwing out weird names.
Because Wan is like Scottish slang for one. So if someone said it was a Scottish person.
All right, that's fair. I didn't know that.
So it's like only one cannoli, but only one cannoli to make it sound like his name. Aye. Not that I've ever had a cannoli, but that's whatever.
I mean, honestly, it was my username for a while, had to do with cannolis, but...
Oh, you were a big fan of cannolis then,
I wasn't. I don't know why I picked that. It was just available on, like, everything, because who the hell would have cannolis in their username?
Fair enough. Sound logic.
Yeah.
So our two emotionless Jedi go for a negotiation to try and calm down. There's a blockade going on. The Trade Federation have put a blockade. And just to make this clear, because I didn't understand this until they said it a bunch of times, but the Trade Federation are the villains of this movie, right? Basically, they're the antagonist force. Although, of course, they're being secretly manipulated by a man who will one day be the Emperor, who may or may not... Now, here's the thing. I wasn't sure watching this if this was supposed to still be a secret when this came out, like who the Emperor actually was.
Right. Yeah.
I don't actually, like, they kind of make it obvious at the end with a shot, but it's not, like, explicit either.
I think that it's one of the things where they were trying to thread the needle of people who know already know, and the people who don't know, we're not going to just outright tell them, but we're going to leave those hints.
Okay. What I'm trying to say is, should we still treat it as a spoiler for future movies?
No.
Okay, all right.
This movie...
Palpatine's behind it all.
Yeah, clearly.
He's playing the political game.
Just by sheer motion of you being on the internet, you have that as a spoiler. Like, that's just a thing.
All right, Darth Vader's Luke's father. Palpatine's the Emperor. All right.
Jar Jar Binks is a Sith Lord. All very well-known things.
That sounds like someone's trying to make it more interesting in the extended material to me.
Yeah.
They're there. They call the Emperor, and they're like, "Shit, there's Jedi here!" So they fill the room with gas. They send some droids. It's a whole thing. They're planning a droid army to go down to Naboo. They want to occupy Naboo, basically, which is where. Well, they don't call her Padme. They call her what? Amidala.
Amidala.
Yeah,
Queen Amidala.
Queen Amidala. She's the queen of Naboo,
which is apparently an elected position still.
So why is it like a 17-year-old girl?
Look, if you want me to go into the expanded reasons, there's a reason. But she's 14 at that. So
she's 14?
She's 14.
Okay, that still doesn't make it any less weird that Anakin grows up to be her lover in the next one. Okay,
yeah.
I'm just going to say that right now. The fact that they met each other at these ages does not make it okay that they're lovers in the next one. All right, Yeah.
I think the age difference is negligible by the time you hit episode 3, but up until then, it's weird.
Yeah, it's negligible. Even in episode 2, it would be fine if that's when they first met. But because they met when he's like 10.
Yeah.
Right? Well, actually, saying that, if 14 doesn't sound that bad when you say the numbers, but she doesn't look 14. She looks...
Oh, yeah, no. There's a prepubescent and a postpubescent, and it's very weird that they're into each other. Yes,
exactly, right? Anywho, so she's the queen of Naboo, which I don't think, like, again, I don't know even why I'm bringing this up, but I don't remember that being important in the next two. Like, is she tied to Naboo in the next two? I don't think she is.
She's tied to Naboo, but she loses the queenhood because she just basically becomes another senator. Like, she just is spending all of her time outside the makeup and just a normal person now. There's really only one scene of it in this first one, but every time you see that Senate set, or I say set, it's not set, it's all CG, and it's all those pods with all the senators, and I'm like, oh, this is so shit. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this boring crap? It's awful. Okay. Sorry, the Jedi, we've already mentioned how they fight their way through the droids. It's basically a nothing thing. They try and cut their way through a big door, but then the big droids show up with the shields and the rolling ones with shield generators, who apparently are the most menacing. Like, everyone freaks out when they show up. To which I question, why not just make more of those? That seems like the obvious answer here. Why are you sending in these little stick figure looking droids when you got these wheelie boys who are just going to wreck everything?
They cost more to run.
It's an army. Build it. Do it.
Look, I never said it was a good reason. I just tried to give you one. Okay?
I'm sure there's one in the expanded lore. Here's the thing. If it's not provided in the movies, I'm not going to count it.
Nor should you.
Yeah.
Like, just because people are writing a bunch of added material to try and fix, like, not even plot holes. Like, that feels... Because plot holes are in everything. There's nothing wrong with a few plot holes. But, like, if all this back matter, whether it's official or unofficial, is being written to try and patch up all these problems that people are noticing, then it doesn't get counted as canon, or it doesn't, like let the movie off for its sins. No.
Honestly, the only thing that it exists to do is when you go onto the Star Wars wiki page and you start reading through, it's like, and then this is the reason why that happened. You're like, oh, I guess that makes sense. Okay. And then you just move on.
It's so great when I watch a movie like The Terminator or Back to the Future and I finish it and nothing needs to be explained to me because the movie just had a good script and was well told.
But you see, in Terminator, the Sarah Connor Chronicles, we get explanations as to why there was a melting facility at that metal plant in the first movie. Weren't you curious about that? Didn't you want to know?
Never once in my life. Fan fiction. That's all it is.
Pretty much.
Big budget fan fiction.
Yep.
So, anywho, so they've been hitching riding one of the droid ships out of the planet because they want to go down and warn Naboo that this is happening, but they're on the other side of the planet, and this is where they bump into Jar Jar and save him from some droids, and now Jar Jar believes that his life is owed to Qui-Gon and he should be his servant for the rest of time. I mean, we haven't really talked about Jar Jar that much yet. I suppose that was the time to...
He's more annoying than I remember him, but I also, like, I don't know, maybe it was just because I was trying to purposely ignore everything he was saying as I was watching it the first times around. But he does actually have, like, a consistent speech pattern. Like, every time that I watched him in the past, I just assumed he was a stupid idiot saying nonsense words all the time. But he does have, like, a consistent dialect. So, 1 point for that, minus 300 for the existence of Jar Jar. So, tally that up, whatever you want to see.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, obviously there's a lot of talk about Jar Jar Binks and the like how racist he is as a character, and it's something that I certainly didn't notice as a kid. Because I wouldn't have recognized any of the things that he's doing that are like other stereotypes or anything like that. But even when you move beyond that, like, a lot of what he is just really childish and silly. Like, I mean, one of the first things that happens when he encounters, like, because he swims them down to his, like, city that he's been banished from, and one of the first things that the other Gungan says to him is, "You're in some doo-doo." And I'm like, well, he's in some doo-doo, is he?
There are no less than 3 to 4 fart/poop jokes in this movie.
Oh,
and they are all Jar Jar.
Yeah, he's
They
definitely
are
poop at
all
one
of them.
point. Yeah.
I just, like, why I understand from, like, George Lucas's perspective, especially because you look back on things like the Ewoks in Return of the Jedi, and you look at other stuff he does. There's this drive to play to the children in the audience. There's this drive of saying, like, hey, look at the funny, look, as you were saying it before, but for a different reason. Look at the shiny keys. Look at them. Look at the shinies. But, like, kids can handle more than that. They don't need fart and poop jokes in order to get a laugh, and I don't understand why he thought that this time around.
Like, you can have something that's clearly more aimed at kids without it being this lowbrow. You can have something that still treats the kids with a little bit, okay, here's something that is obviously clearly more appealing to a kid, but it's not going to insult the intelligence of the kid, or the adults for that matter. And it feels like that's all Jar Jar is. There's a reason why he quickly disappears into the background in the later movies.
Yep.
Because obviously there's a lot of flack was thrown in their direction for him, and rightfully so. So, yeah, and this is the thing. Like, it's Jar Jar's CG. It looks horrendous when they go to the leader of the Gungan city, and he is like he keeps shaking his lips and mouth,
his jowls.
Yeah, and that all looks really bad. And Qui-Gon's like, oh, we're gonna have to fly a ship through the center of the earth to get to Naboo to try and warn the Queen of what's going on, and. Fine, I guess. It kind of just feels like an excuse for, like, oh, we've got some ideas for some big fish monsters that they can chase them underwater.
So this is one part that really got me, and I don't know whether or not I was giving this movie more or less credit, but as I was watching this again, I thought that there are two fish scenes that are separated by like 10 seconds of something else going on.
Mm-hmm.
In my mind, this was all one long, really long, continuous segment. Like, I thought I remembered this fish scene going on forever. And then all of a sudden it ends and it's just like, okay, that was a nice little action scene in the middle. But honest to God, both of them take at most like 20 seconds. And then they're just done with. And another big fish shows up. That's it. That's the end of the scene both times.
I think my problem with this, other than just obviously the effects and stuff, is that in no point Qui-Gon or Obi-Wan are ever concerned or ever act like they're in any danger at all. It's really, it's just Jar Jar screaming and him being scared, and the other two don't care. And the way to pay it off would have been, they're like that at first, but then like the bigger fish shows up, and then maybe Qui-Gon doesn't like start freaking out, but like just gets a little bit of concern in his face, just to tell the audience, oh hey, that actually was maybe a little closer than he would have liked to admit.
But you see, Pete, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering.
Then why
so
do
they
I
can't
care?
be afraid.
Well, then why do I care about Ethan in the scene?
You don't. And that's what I was getting at, is that as a kid, I remember this sequence being so much longer, and I was like, oh yeah, all these fish things. But watching it back now, I'm like, oh, this doesn't matter at all, because it's done with before any sort of stakes are set.
Yeah, and the characters never care, except Jar Jar. And okay, if you're going to tell me, because if you go back to the first movie, right, I'm thinking of, they're in the Millennium Falcon, they're going towards the Death Star. I'm trying to remember if Obi-Wan was really stoic in that scene. But even if he was, the reason why that still works is because you've got like 3 other characters in that scene all reacting and being more human about it.
Having just watched it, there's the sequence when they realize the Death Star and he says, that's no moon. You see his eyes widen. He realizes the implications of this. He is not okay.
Yeah, so he's still keeping calm, but yeah, you can see that it's affected him. He's not, unresponsive to it. Yeah, okay, so yeah, furthermore. But even if you're going to tell me, the Qui-Gon's whole character is that he's not scared, I'm like, okay, we'll make Obi-Wan different then. Make him act a little different to Qui-Gon so that there's some chemistry between them. Except, because all he really is just, he keeps saying, yes, master, and acts almost the same way he does. And that's not interesting.
That's not even his full character. His character is literally like, but master, what about this? And Qui-Gon goes, don't worry about it. And he goes, all right, cool. And that's his character. He brings up like one point of contention and then just immediately listens to what Qui-Gon has to say. And
Obi-Wan, you will stay back at the ship and I will do all the important plot of this movie. Okay, master.
Gotcha.
That's literally what happens in a bit.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like the invading force is coming for the Queen. The 2 Jedi jump out as they're being like ushered somewhere and kill the droids. And it's like, hey, we can get away together. All right, let's go.
Yep.
So they take a ship.
Flee the planet, get through the blockade. I just want to point out one thing that happens here because I am baffled by the reason behind it.
Go on.
As their plan, if you can even call it that, is they reach the main hangar and there's a group of pilots that are being held captive by droids. And Obi-Wan says, I'll take care of them. Ostensibly, he just walks over. But then Qui-Gon goes to a different group of droids who are blocking the ship, and he's like, I'm taking these people to Coruscant. And the droid goes, I'm sorry, where? He's like, Coruscant. He's like, that doesn't compute. And then they start blasting. I'm like, what was that? Why in the hell did this droid just like have a moment of humanity of like, I'm sorry, I didn't catch that, huh?
Yeah, that's weird. I don't know why.
Yeah. And it didn't like further anything. It wasn't like there was a moment where like, oh, they've been caught out and this is a moment of tension. Like, no, he just doubles down and says, we're going to Coruscant.
Yeah, and obviously we're introduced to R2-D2 around this part of the movie because he's on the ship. He ends up, all the other droids that are trying to fix the shields and the outside of the ship get shot away. He's the one last droid who does it. And
he's the specialist boy.
They're going to give him a medal because he's a special droid. There. And they're like, what's his number? And like the sergeant's like, R2-D2, Your Highness. Like, R2-D2, you'll forever be remembered. You're important now.
I hereby give you plot armor.
It's like, not everything has to be introduced in advance.
I really, like, when I really think about it, though, it's actually amazing that this is where R2 came from. Like, maybe it's just because I hate how other movies have handled like the prequelness and treating everything as so sacred. But like, it's amazing to me that R2 was just a random ass droid on this random ass ship whose only claim to fame is he didn't die. Like, that's it.
Yeah. Basically, they're damaged, though. The ship can't really get very far. They're going to have to land somewhere close by. They can't get to Coruscant, which is the big, main capital hub world. Yep. So they like, oh, this shitty little planet called Tatooine's nearby. The Federation don't go there, so like it's rough. It's not very nice, but they're not looking for you there. So we'll try that. But the whole
planet is run by. I'm sorry, let me check the paperwork. Jabba the Hutt. Who's this character that I'm sure we don't know about?
When he showed up at the pod race with that awful CG, and it is dreadful, I just died a little bit inside. Like, like, you could have just had a big, puppet, like you did in 1983 in Return of the Jedi. But you're like, no, we're advancing things. We're doing all this cutting-edge digital CGI technology, baby.
Let me ask you, how did you end up watching this movie?
What do you mean?
Like, where did Disney Plus? I'm assuming.
Yeah, just 4K. Yeah,
just Disney Plus. Okay, because there is actually the original theatrical cut. They still had CGI like Jabba, but they did have original puppet Yoda in the original theatrical, and then in the special like re-releases, they changed it to CGI Yoda at the end.
I just thought that's just upsetting. Why would you?
Yeah.
Why would you do that? That's maddening.
To match the later movies.
Oh, okay. And are both versions on Disney Plus, or is it just
no?
Okay.
Why would they ever give you the original, Pete?
Well,
you're gonna take the new stuff and you're gonna like it.
I'm not clamoring for the original cut of Phantom Menace. I don't care if that's available.
That's fair.
Oh,
it has
dear.
even more doo-doo jokes that you didn't even know about.
It's just funny that even the prequels now have been altered since the release.
Yep.
That's where we are in the world. Excellent.
They took out the practical effects and put in special effects just to piss you off.
God, all the aliens look so bad. Like, see when they're walking around Tatooine, and because they can use CG now, there's so many like aliens that couldn't be played by actors or even like half decent puppets. They have to be CG. They've been designed to be physically impossible to do any other way. But they still look like shit though. It's like, okay, I get why you thought, oh, let's go wacky with all these weird designs that aren't even remotely humanoid, but they still look bad. So they, Qui-Gon goes into town with R2-D2, and he's asked to take Padme.
Yep.
Who, one of the few things I remembered about this movie actually is that she was going to turn out to be the queen, because like, we're not supposed to know this shit in the movie, right? This is like, obviously it's revealed later on. But Padme swaps places with the queen. Well, she is the queen, but she swaps places with her like handmaiden, and we're supposed to believe Padme, the character being called Padme, is just the handmaiden, but she's actually the queen. She's both. So, because there is a moment earlier on where you see the queen standing there, and like Natalie Portman standing next to her, and like just like regular sort of duds, and you're like, wait, why is there two Natalie Portmans? That's weird. Well,
the other one was actually played by Keira Knightley.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Fair enough. It was it's hard to tell with the makeup, to be honest.
But... Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm sure that's like half the reason that they had the makeup was like audiences won't be able to tell if it's just completely blank face with a couple of red dots on there.
Plus, a lot of the time they had like the rest of her head covered, so you only see like the central oval of her face. Plus the makeup. So yeah, it's hard to tell. But yeah, I actually had no idea it was Keira Knightley. So fair enough. So they go out of town. They run into Anakin.
They go to Watto's shop, which is the whole thing they're looking for is that their hyperdrive got damaged during the blockade, and so they need a hyperdrive replacement. And Watto is the only place in town that has one.
MacGuffin. That's all it is.
Yep.
It's just, they need the MacGuffin. And Watto won't give them it. We meet Anakin, who's a sparky young kid who's very inquisitive, talks to Padme a bit.
Very inquisitive, asking questions like, "Are you an angel?"
Oh God, that was so cringy.
It was. That was the number one point where I was like, "Who let George Lucas just put this on screen? Any of you could have stopped this."
You're an angel. My mom says they're the most beautiful creatures in all of the galaxy. Like, are you already hitting on her? Are you flirting right now, Anakin? Because that's what it sounds like.
100%. He heard some star pilot use that exact same line on like some other alien girl, and it's just like, perfect. I'm going to use that.
Yeah. Watto doesn't want the currency they have. Qui-Gon tries to Jedi mind trick him, but it doesn't work because they don't work on this alien race.
Yeah, okay. This is the part I have a problem with, because in New Hope, they explicitly say, like, oh, the Jedi mind trick, it works on the weak-minded. Like, they give you an out. They say, as long as you are strong-willed and smart and whatever, Jedi mind trick won't work on you. It only works on the weak-minded. And then they present you with this guy who his entire race is just immune to Jedi mind tricks. See, it seems to me like this would be the thing that the Sith want to use more than anything.
My problem with this is less that. I mean, I agree it's kind of changing like what the out is. Like now you're saying that genetically some species just won't take to it, right? Whatever, that's a new thing. My bigger problem, and I know what the defense to this is going to be, is that it's not the first movie, right? There's 3 previous movies, but a good TV show for a comparison here, a good TV show, even though something's already been introduced, smart writing will remind the audience of it before you do the different thing with it, so that you understand that something's changed, right? So my complaint with this is that there should have been a scene earlier in this film, for whatever reason, where Qui-Gon uses the Jedi mind trick and succeeds with someone.
There was.
Was there?
Boss Nass. When he goes down to the Gungans and he says, like, hey, we need a ship or whatever. If you watch, he's doing the hand wave, and Boss Nass repeats after him and says, like, we'll give you a ship and you are free to go. But it's so tiny. Like, they don't draw attention to it at all.
Fair enough. Maybe they should have emphasized it more, but fair enough. Because my critique here was that you're like, it should feel like a bigger deal that it's not working. But again, Qui-Gon doesn't react. He just tries it again, and then it's Watto who gives us the exposition. He's like, wait, you think it's some sort of Jedi? That doesn't work on me. All I could hear in my head was Biff going, those boars don't work on water.
Yeah. That's fair, yeah.
But see if Qui-Gon actually reacted to it, like, wait a minute, why is this not working? Like, that might have been like a moment. That might have been like, oh, he's shell-shocked because his trick's not working. But no, he just stands there stoically, like it's nothing.
Yeah.
And then he's like, okay, well, hopefully a new opportunity will present itself, but we have no money and the tricks didn't work, so we'll see what happens.
We trust in the Force. The Force will give us an out. And by the Force, I mean George Lucas.
There's a sandstorm coming, and they won't make it back to their ship in time. So young Anakin says, hey, come in my place, you won't make it back in time. So he brings back, like, 2 adults and a droid back to, like, his place, and his mom's like, hi, honey, who are these adult strangers that you've brought home with you?
This guy wanted to buy something from the shop, and he was pissed off he couldn't get it, and I plan on having babies with that woman.
Oh, dear. Okay. And this conveniently gets us on to Anakin and his mother, and basically this entire little saga of weird dynamic that we get from the pair of them. Like, there's moments in all of this where, like, Anakin's mother just kind of goes along with things that don't make any sense. Like, later, this is much later on after the pod race, but at one point, Qui-Gon comes in after he's made all the deals with Watto and whatever, and she's like, is he to be a Jedi? And I'm like, wait, do you not feel like you have a say in whether or not your son goes off and trains with someone on a different planet? Like he's going to take the son away. And to be fair, later in the scene, she does say, hey, Anakin, I want this to be your choice. Do you want to do this? Fair enough. But the way she says that question, like, it's not even she's not even got a say in it. It's like, no, if Qui-Gon says he's going, and that's it.
I mean, okay, so I'll give it a little bit of a look at what was presented in the movie, which is, A, they live as slaves. So the idea that they can escape this place and go do something better with their life, I think is appealing regardless. B, I think that you're saying that she doesn't sound like she has a choice in that. I think that's also part of that, like, slave thing going on, where I'm sure she doesn't feel like she's in charge of any aspect of her life, even when it comes down to, like, her own kid in that way. It's always to the bounds of whatever, like, what Watto's gonna want. So perhaps that's just like a subsidiary on her. But I think the biggest thing here is that this is why Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru were killed. This is why a bunch of Disney movies that focus on children don't have living parents. And that's essentially, if you want your child to go off on a dangerous adventure, you're an irresponsible parent. So we kind of have to, in order to make this work, somehow justify her without making her irresponsible, which is hard.
On that subject, you know, when they first bring up the idea of, hey, Anakin can be in the pod race and maybe win the money you need for the parts you need. When that first comes up and the mum says, oh, you know, I don't like when you race in those things, they're dangerous and whatever. Right? Obviously, we hear that. And when she says that, it kind of sounds like maybe a mum who says, oh, I don't like my son playing football or ice hockey because, you know, it gets kind of violent and rough and whatever.
I don't like my son dancing.
Right? But when you see the pod race actually act out and that the racers are actually driving the other competitors into canyons where they're exploding, I'm like, no, you're a terrible mother for even allowing him to do this in the first place. This isn't just like he could get some bruises and some scrapes. This is like instant death if he just makes the wrong choice at any point. But here's the thing I really want to talk about, right?
Okay.
Obviously, we're going to get to midichlorians. We'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
I want to talk about, because I'd forgotten this detail, Immaculate Conception.
Yep.
We got to talk about that, because Qui-Gon's like, you know, he's starting to notice, oh, he sees things before they happen. He's got a connection to the Force. Oh, who was his father? And she's like, there was no father. And when she said that, I wasn't thinking anything other than just, oh, it was a one-night stand or whatever.
Yeah, he's a deadbeat and he's not around anymore.
But then he's like, but then she gets really specific and says, I carried him. I gave birth to him. You know, I don't know. But, and even if it was still wiggle room to like, oh, you can interpret what she said in a lot of different ways. Later in the movie, Qui-Gon says to the Jedi Council, he was conceived by the midichlorians. He says that.
I'm going to say this to a very specific subset of the audience here. Are you familiar with the tragedy of Darth Plagueis? It's not a tale the Jedi would tell you. I dislike this just as much as you do. Mm-hmm. Don't get me wrong. The fact that he is literally Jesus Christ. Like, that's too much. But I do think that they do a decent job in the later prequels of teasing out that this was all still like part of the plan to some extent, of like, not just, oh, the Force decided this. Like, they tease that the Sith made this happen.
Look, here's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
When you subscribe everything to some kind of destiny, like someone's always destined for the great thing they're going to do later on, it takes away what makes it special. You know, instead of it being a great story of someone becoming something, it becomes, no, they were always destined to become that thing, and they were just on a railroad track until they got there. That makes it inherently less interesting. Forgetting the fact that I just hate the idea that the Jedi all start talking about, he's the chosen one who'll bring balance to the Force. There's a chosen one. Why is there a chosen one? I hate this all so much, but the main thing being is that by saying he's destined to be special from the very first second you meet him, makes the fact that he becomes Darth Vader a million times less interesting to me. Because it's far more interesting about like, okay, he's going to go through this journey, he's going to do great things, he's got potential, tragic things are going to happen, and he's going to go down this path. That could potentially be a good story, right? I'm not saying I need it to be told, but I could see the potential in it. But as soon as you say right from the get-go, no, he's destined to be special.
I agree. But I would even take it a step back from there, because they don't actually mention any like chosen one prophecy stuff until we get to the Jedi Temple. Obviously, that's the implication going on earlier, but I think it comes back straight down to the introduction of midichlorians. Like, the moment you have midichlorians and the count of it, the amount of midichlorians in your blood is what determines whether or not you are a strong Force user or not. That just, like, that's a horrible decision, because it immediately robs it of, oh, well, Force is this, like, unexplainable thing. It's this thing that, like, you know, you can really, like, meditate with the Force and become one with it, and you can just develop a Force awareness. It's the kind of things that kids would dream about. So now to specifically say, like, yeah, but if you don't have special blood, you're not going to be a Jedi. Well, that's the same sort of thing of all of the Jedi at that point are then chosen ones. They all have this special destiny.
It becomes genetic instead of being something that you can make of yourself. Mm-hmm. And the idea that Luke made himself special because he wanted to be good and he wanted to do the right thing, and that's why he was connected to the Force. Instead, it's just, and obviously, there was always the fact that he came from another Jedi. He came from his father was, connected to the Force. But the fact that he sort of built up rather than just being like, oh no, you're always going to be special is far more interesting than this. Like the idea that, you could just read your blood and, it's what entire things like Gattaca are about. It's this idea that from birth you're going to be important and you're not, so just have this life.
That's part of what like there was that period around Hunger Games with the young adult dystopian genre and stuff like that. And every single one of them was like, oh, you hit a certain age and then we have this test, or there's something that's just innate to your self-being and it'll determine the rest of your life. And people started hating on that. People were like, oh God, it's so stupid that you're just like having it be this like thing and somebody can fight against their fate and be different. But with Star Wars, they're just giving it a pass because it's like, oh yeah, well, Jedi, it's in your blood. You can't go against that. It's the same thing. As this movie establishes it, obviously the original trilogy had a different idea towards that.
Yeah, it's yeah. I feel like midichlorians obviously has been this like main focal talking point about the fandom and like hating this movie and like what the prequels added to everything. Is someone who, as I've established, doesn't care about the lore so much as I just care about having a good movie. This is the sort of thing that makes things less interesting to me. I don't think it's high on the list of this movie's problems. I think the characters not being likable or interesting or engaging is problem number one. The cinematography and the direction being bland and dull being problem number two. CG being problem number three. Like there's a whole list of things that are wrong with this.
Yeah, I don't think the midichlorians are a problem with this movie. I think it's a problem that he introduced to the franchise as a whole. I think this is one of those things that has these long-lasting implications that he just didn't think about. He didn't think about how this would affect things moving forward, and it causes big problems in that regard.
Yeah. So, I mean, this boils down basically to he tests the boy for midichlorians. His numbers are off the chart, even more than Yoda. That's what they say. He's super special already. And, you could read this as, because, I like, obviously, the hit television show Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and obviously she's a chosen one in that. But the reason why that's never a problem in that show is because being the chosen one is actually just a metaphor for growing up. It's a metaphor for responsibility. And that's always the lens that it's told the story through, is that this is this burden. She has to do all these extra things because she's quote unquote the chosen one. But all it really means is you're a human being with responsibilities and you have to start actually dealing with them as opposed to being a kid. But when I'm watching this, like I can't think of a single thing the midichlorians are being used as a storytelling device for. They're just...
it's a shorthand so that they don't have to go through the thing of saying like, oh, he's sensitive to the Force, and we have to somehow prove that he's important enough. He's so sensitive that he's worth saving from slavery and bringing to the Jedi Council. There was no like, he could have just been an average Jedi unless they had this special number to look at and be like, oh, he's a special Jedi.
Do you know what's so frustrating? Is that even just as you're saying that, I'm just rewriting this part of the movie in my head to make it work in ways you don't have to have this. Okay, and this even solves the whole problem with the mum letting him do the pod race. He does not give him permission. He doesn't even tell the others he's doing it. He just goes to do it to help because he's inherently good and he wants to help these people that he's met, right?
Yeah.
And then when he does the pod race, he pulls off some moves that have to be Force like assisted. Like Qui-Gon recognizes that. He doesn't read the number off a screen. He sees an action. He it's showing, not telling. He sees.
They've got cameras on the pod race. They show him just like reach out and a cable just like whoops right into his hand without him even like trying.
And you use that. And that proves to Qui-Gon he's beyond any Force user he's ever seen, and that motivates him saying, I want to like train your son. I want to take him and make him a great Jedi because he might be very important. Like, There you go. That solves some of those other problems we brought up, and it solves that main one of the midichlorians. And it's actually more interesting and engaging to watch because you're seeing a moment where he proves himself and inspires the actions in Qui-Gon, as opposed to, here's a jab, hey, Obi-Wan, look at these numbers. I'm looking at these numbers. They're off the charts. Yes, they're off the charts. Even Master Yoda doesn't have numbers these high. Yes. What does it mean? I don't know yet. Nothing.
Anyway,
I feel nothing.
I gotta get down to the horse race. Bye.
I feel nothing when watching these scenes. They're delivered with absolutely no emotion, with absolutely no flair, no creativity. It's so wild how unaspiring this movie is. Like, everything's just told in this very matter-of-fact checklist way, where we've established this thing so we can move on to that. We've explained this thing so we can move on to that. And that's it. That's all it is. You go through the whole movie, it's just a series of scenes where they explain things, and then the cool action is not even cool because he's not good at shooting action scenes.
No, that's fair. All right, so can I just very briefly get us up to the pod race?
Go for it.
All right, so the ideas that happen is Anakin says, like, hey, I have a pod race thing. I'm the only human who can do it because I'm a special boy. Let me race in the pod race, and the winnings for that can cover your hyperdrive, and it'll all be cool. And of course, his mother says no, and then he says, like, oh, but Mom, we got to be good people, and he says yes. So the idea is Qui-Gon goes to Watto, says, hey, I've got a pod, which is the one Anakin built, and I got a driver, but I need the permission of you to let the driver be in the race. And Watto says, sure, why not? We'll split the winnings 50-50. And he's like, well, if we're splitting it 50-50, how about you just give me the part I need if we win, and you can keep all the money, and if I lose, then you can have my ship. So no matter what, you win. And he's like, sold, got it. So the rest of the race goes on ahead, and then as we're going into race day, we have Watto saying, I bet against Anakin on this other driver because that other driver always wins. And Qui-Gon's like, all right, I'll take that bet. If Anakin wins, he gets to go free. If not, then you get to keep something else as well. I'm not even sure.
I think that's when he offered the ship. I don't think he offered the ship in the previous
He didn't put the ship up yet?
I think the ship was there, yeah.
Fair enough. Regardless.
He
offers up the pod. That's what it is. The pod racer.
He tries to get both Anakin and the mum free, and then Watto's like, nah, two slaves aren't worth one pod. And he's like, okay, fine, the boy then. And then pulls a bit of Jedi mind trick, because he rolls a dice to decide which one will go free if Anakin wins. And obviously Qui-Gon uses a little bit of his force trickery.
Like, I could just mess with gambling a little bit.
So
I'd love to see Qui-Gon at Atlantic City, because he'd mess with it.
Yeah, and the pod race is interesting because it's the one thing that everyone who still admits this movie's not good say, yeah, but the pod race scene's good, and I'm like, I guess in comparison to the rest of the movie, it's okay. Like at least
the compared to the rest of the movie, yes, because I think this is the one point in the movie where it finally does action. It has some level of tension, and I think that because it is essentially a race scene, there's no way to do like bad acting, you know?
Sure.
It's all just up to the visuals.
Well, I think the main thing is they set up the stakes before it started. We understand what the consequences are. We understand that the others are cheating and like it's getting dangerous.
Yep.
A lot of it, obviously, so much of it is bad CG. There's not getting around that at this point.
Yeah. That's fair.
You know,
but again, I think they do ships really well, and I'd say these pods are close enough to ships that I think it works. Like, nothing stands out, especially because the whole scene is CG. Like, the only thing that's live action at all is Jake Lloyd's face every once in a while going, oh gosh.
Oh yeah, no, I'm talking more about the environments and even the crowd that's watching at the sort of starting line. Like, all that CG I think is really rough.
That's fair. So, I mean, the announcers are the worst.
Oh, it's like a two-headed alien, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and he's just like, don't get me wrong, I get what they were going for, but it's weird that they have like a stereotypical racer announcer at this place to begin with, and then add on top of it, he just doesn't look good. He looks like the worst CGI character, in my opinion.
And now you've got CG Jabba, who looks like someone drew a face on a turd.
That's okay. The race announcer is the second worst CGI character. I'll give you that.
There's this like thing with the aliens where, like, when they're moving their mouths, there's this sort of quality where it looks like there's like stretch lines in parts of the skin that I don't think are meant to be there as detail. They're just kind of like, they're byproducts of how the CG works at the time.
Yeah, that's probably true. I mean, that was back in the day. People weren't quite sure. You had to balance the way that we knew like how skin and stuff stretched with how much could computing power really handle back then. And so some cuts had to be made, and it made these weird sort of like you're saying, these stretch lines that shouldn't have been in certain places.
It's kind of, it is wild, and like obviously this is not that much of an insult because obviously there's a big time gap, but we are genuinely at a point now where modern video games are punching above what some big budget movies had for CG in this time period. Like if you look at some of the Unreal 5 engine games that are starting to be shown off a little bit, that new Marvel game got a trailer this week that looks, as far as character models goes, some of the best that I've ever seen in the video game, and it's like, this looks better. Like if you go back to like the Matrix Reloaded scene where he's fighting all the Agent Smiths, right? Yeah. Like video games surpassed that like a decade ago at least, where it looks more lifelike. And I'm not even talking about cutscenes. I'm talking about when you're playing the game, it looks more lifelike than those scenes. So you know, and again, obviously that's not a fair comparison because time has obviously moved forward, but it's very interesting, and it just kind of points out how some of this stuff where it's not that you can't have some CG from this time period. I mean, you go back to T2. T2's CG, well, it looks like CG, never like ruins anything, and it still fits quite well in the scenes that it's in because it was still used sparingly. You know, they still did everything else as much as they could. Same in Jurassic Park. You can tell the CG, but they used as practical as much as they could. It's the problem is in that early CG period where they said, oh, we can just do everything with CG now pretty much. And they relied on it so heavily that now when you go back and watch a movie like this 25 years later, the CG has aged so badly, and it's so much of the movie that it really, really hurts everything. And this movie didn't need any more problems, but there it is.
No, but I mean, I'm wholesale putting that on George Lucas, because obviously Industrial Lights and Magic, ILM, pretty much started with Star Wars. It was made in order to make that with practical effects, and then they were kind of at the front line of CG. They were at the battlefront when it came to developing this computer-generated imagery. So by the time that this movie came around, I think George was like, we're the ones leading the charge. Let's put our money where our mouth is and put this as mostly CG. But it just wasn't there yet. They just didn't have as much capability as they really thought they did.
Nah. Yeah, there's a great clip from the behind-the-scenes stuffs on Deep Blue Sea, where Rennie Harling's like, oh, the CG sharks are great. I dare you to tell the difference between when we were using a practical shark and a CG shark. And I'm like, Rennie, it's obvious every time. Like dude, it's 1999. I mean, like the CG in that's still fine in the scenes that it's in, but it's like, you know, you can tell.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, that's the same thing. You go back and look at like ads and press kits for like PS2 games, and they're like lifelike graphics. And it's like, really, though? Really?
Oh, dear. So, yeah, pod racing happens. Obviously, Anakin wins. I mean, he kind of wins because every other racer blows up by the end.
Yeah. I was trying to keep track of when we got the intro of like all the different racers, whether or not all of them blew up. But at a certain point, you just can't keep track of it anymore. It seems like they all did, though. Yeah,
which is it's the burnout tactic, just to take down everyone rather than actually beat them fairly in a race.
Yeah, but I mean, to be fair, Anakin was playing the most fair. Everyone else crashed because of their own stupidity or violence.
That is true. I can't fault that. So yeah, they've won. They're going to leave, and it's worth mentioning that while all this was playing out, there was a few cutaways to the Emperor being like, "Hey, you guys have failed to stop the Queen, so here's my apprentice, Darth Maul, who you'll see for the first time in a hologram," even though, like, I don't know, maybe a cool introduction for him would have been fun, maybe a nice idea. Yeah. And then Darth Maul has a scene with the Emperor where he's basically just saying, hey, we've tracked him to this planet, Tatooine, off you go.
Tiny little thing.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't matter. But, like, Qui-Gon specifically says, hey, you don't respond to any messages because they will be able to track you. And Obi-Wan's like, got it. And then they get a message saying, everything's going to hell. You need to call me back. And Obi-Wan's like, it's a trick. Don't send any response or they're going to track it. And everyone's like, you got it, boss. And then we cut to this Darth Maul scene. It's like, so we tracked them and they're on Tatooine. And it's like, well, then what the hell was the point of all the other stuff?
Do you think
saying tracking?
Yeah, well, I can only assume that that's implying someone in the ship did secretly send a message back. That's the only thing I can assume, but
it wasn't shown. At no point did it show anybody saying like, oh, I don't trust that Obi-Wan. I need to send a message. My girlfriend thinks I went out for milk.
Again, remember how I was sort of fixing things in a previous part with the whole like motivation for the pod racing and all that stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Here's another one that I'm going to fix. So Darth Maul shows up on the planet before the pod race even happens, right? He lands, he just sort of like parks his little moped, his little space moped. He's got like a little hoverboard thing, right?
Yeah.
And he sends out like a few of these sort of drone things that go looking through the town for the Queen or whoever. And it's like, okay, fine, right? He's here. And then the entire pod race scene plays out. He tells Anakin, hey, you're free now. You're not a slave anymore. They have the emotional goodbye with the mom. Star Wars theme plays. Yada, yada. Well, I'll say Star Wars. The Force theme plays, I should say. And they do that whole thing, right? And all this is going on. Darth Maul doesn't decide to show up and attack until they're about to get on the ship. Like, he's finally got his drones back, and he's going hunting, and he has a little bit of an interaction with Qui-Gon before Qui-Gon leaves the fight to jump on the ship just as it's leaving. And that plays out. This all felt super weird and stilted to me because it just felt like your main antagonist, like villain in the movie, right? The main one that they're going to fight, right? Your Darth Vader of this movie has been introduced, and all he has done is wait in the desert for what's felt like at least a day before he tries to come after them, but is basically too late and fails instantly. So the first thing we see him do is fail. And that just felt really weird to me as far as building him up as a big bad that they're going to have to fight. He should be scary to the audience and to potentially the main characters. And I think the quick way you fix this is just have him arrive where he has no time to go get them. And like the fact that he was waiting in the desert for a whole day just like really makes this all feel like he's just shit at his job. If he had just arrived in Tatooine, because space takes a long time to travel, right, that's fine. If he just arrived and they were already mid-leaving, so it's like, oh no, they just got out in the nick of time because as soon as he landed, he knew where they were immediately because he's that good, he's that smart. It can show how good he is at like getting these targets, like a Terminator. He like zones in on them right away, and they just get away in the nick of time because they were already leaving. They just got lucky, and it wouldn't like nerf the villain. But instead, Qui-Gon fights him for like a minute and then just like leaves with almost no tension. Like, well, that wasn't a big deal. Like, again, if Qui-Gon like, I don't know, felt like, oh god, this guy may actually beat me. Like, if he actually looked worried, that would tell us something.
I mean, I will say that when he jumped into the ship at the end, he like fell back on his ass and was like exhausted. And Obi-Wan's like, what the hell was that? He's like, I don't know. That was just weird.
Again,
anyway, Anakin.
More concerned. Like, I get that he's tired from the fight, but more concern. It would just go such a long way.
Yeah, I mean, if you still have to keep that fight, which I agree, I think that should have changed a little bit there. I don't understand what the point of the drones was, especially because I don't think we actually see the drones like spotting them at any point.
No, there's like one shot of one of them like going through the main town square, but that's about it.
Yeah, like it doesn't actually witness them. So I think if you want to keep everything up till then better, have him arrive a little bit later, still decently like ahead of time, probably during the pod race would be the best time where he shows up. And then he goes into town. We find out that the whole exchange between Qui-Gon and Watto has already happened. Watto is still just yelling and shouting about it. He's super pissed off. They say like, oh, I just lost that hyperdrive to that guy. I think he fixed it. He was pulling like Jedi mind tricks or something. Darth Maul hears that. We get him to get more information from Watto by like intimidating or possibly killing him. And that would then set him as like an actual threat. And then, because they're already on their way back to the ship with Anakin, he can be like, all right, I'm out of time. And he's got to sprint out of the town into the desert to go get him.
Because that's the thing. What you're describing is also him doing something. It's showing that he is a threat. And up until now, I guess the fight kind of shows it, but up until that point, all we have to go on is how he looks. Because that's all he is. He's the red and black paint.
He shows up in the hologram with his arms crossed, looking super menacing, and then he talks to Palpatine, and it's just like, we're finally going to fight against the Jedi. We're going to reveal ourselves. I'm so excited. And then that's it. That's all you get.
I don't think he had a German accent, but yeah.
honest to God, he was whispering the whole time. I couldn't hear like what kind of accent he has. I was assuming some sort of British, but
the actor's English. It's Peter Serafinowicz from Shaun of the Dead that's in it, but it's Darth Maul. But it's weird because I just like thinking about how they introduced Darth Maul, where he's introduced into a scene where he doesn't say anything, he just stands there menacing, and then he's in a walk and talk, and there's a lot of walk and talks in these movies because that's what these prequels are known for, is just two characters walking and talking. And then when he eventually gets into a fight, it's kind of this weird anticlimactic thing where it's over really fast. Like, when you introduce your main, like, villain, especially the villain that's going to do the fighting, right? I know technically the Emperor's the main villain, but
yeah,
like, the one who's going to actually be the fighting force against the heroes, you want to give them a cool introduction. It goes back to the Jedi. They also needed to have a cool introduction at the start of the movie. That's what you do. You give them introductions that sell the audience and who they are, gives you a good taste of who they are. Instead, this is just like menacing. And I'm not saying you can't get a glimpse of them. Like, yeah, like let's say he was like looking for them on Tatooine, and you saw like some glimpses of him in the crowd, like staring, like kind of menacing. That'd be like, oh, they just teased something. Like that would be fine, because that'd be like, hey, there's someone watching. Who's that? And then when he sort of really reveals himself, he's like, oh, he's a villain and he's doing something badass or whatever. But instead, we get him in multiple scenes just standing around or talking, and it's like, this is not how you introduce a prominent character in a movie that's full of action and adventure and threat and menace. Like this. Yeah. It's just
I would argue the exact same argument goes for the Emperor. He shows up in a hologram, and the very first thing that happens that he's introduced to is the Viceroy saying, like, there's a bunch of Jedi here. And he's like, crap, I didn't expect that at all. I mean, okay, kill him.
I guess it mimics how he's shown in like The Empire Strikes Back when he first shows up as well, but
yeah, but it's the idea that he was caught off guard was the very first thing that happens. He's like, oh, that shouldn't have happened at all yet. Okay, kill them, and then we're just gonna pump our plans up a little bit.
What they probably should have done is just allude to they're working with someone bad, but not call him, and then you can build up to who it is later on, I guess, or something like that. But yeah, again, you should have more of an introduction. Because, you know, again, go back to the original Star Wars. The opening scene is almost entirely built around the idea of introducing Darth Vader. That he comes in and just wipes the floor with all these, like, troopers that are attacking him. And he's menacing. He questions someone. It sets up that he is the main primary antagonist. And it's this kind of thing. Han Solo gets the scene in the bar where he's, you know, the whole hand shot first thing obviously is a whole thing that people talk about now for various reasons, but it is an introduction scene. It shows you a bit of who his character is, and he's kind of cool and badass in it, you know, like it just I mean, I guess Luke arguably, you know, doesn't immediately have like a cool scene to be introduced in, but
no, but he's our central prime protagonist. Either he's already developed as a badass in certain movies, and they would give him a badass scene later on, or he has to grow to become that. In which case, you just introduce him. Fair. You just do what you can.
Yeah. So no characters in this movie get a good introduction. There's not one of them that get a good. This defines who they are and shows their appeal to the audience in their first scene. Not one of them.
The only one I would argue is being representative of what the audience should have known from then on was Jar Jar.
I suppose that's true, actually.
Like, he shows up and he's just already a nuisance where Qui-Gon has to tackle him out of the way. So yeah, that's him. Oh yeah, you get him.
Yeah, Jar Jar went into town with them, by the way, and we forgot to mention him, and it didn't matter because he doesn't do anything that's important. All he does is step and poop and make the odd joke.
He is there as the butt monkey. He is there for everyone else to point and laugh at and say, oh, Jar Jar, you stupid idiot.
He has no purpose in terms of advancing the story.
3PO is not quite built yet. Oh yeah, obviously that would be 3PO's role later on.
But we do get introduced to 3PO because Anakin's building him. He's naked, as R2-D2 apparently says.
Don't you like the fact that 3PO is just a built from scraps protocol droid from Darth Vader's childhood days? Doesn't that add so much to the character?
You'd think Darth Vader would, you know, if this is his past story that he built C-3PO, he might recognize 3PO at some point in the original trilogy at some point.
In the original trilogy, yes, he definitely should have. However, I am going to throw out that the comics and stuff like that like fill the gaps between New Hope to Empire and Empire to Return of the Jedi. They go pretty in depth with that.
I do not care.
I know. The one that I get is towards the end of Empire, 3PO gets like torn up into shreds, and then all of a sudden the like parts of it are inside of Chewbacca's cell, and it's like, how did those get there? There's a comic that shows Darth Vader that like came across the box of scraps and was like, oh my god, that's 3PO. Well, don't send it down to the scrap heap, but just put it in the cell with the Wookiee. I'll get back to it later.
Yeah, comic books and stuff filling in some gaps and explaining things that the movies messed up is not something I care about. That's just them fixing problems. It's just admitting the movies did things that were stupid.
Yep.
That's all that is. So, anyway, they get away. They finally get to Coruscant where the Jedis are and all that. Qui-Gon...
Tell me more about trade negotiations. I need them. Tell me.
Well, I was going to talk about the Jedi first, which is Qui-Gon telling all them, hey, this kid's important. Let's train him as a Jedi. And they're like, all right, let's meet him. And then immediately Yoda's like, I don't know. He's pretty upset about his mom. That could lead to fear and hate and the dark side and all that. Maybe this is a bad idea. And then Qui-Gon's like, I'll train him on my own if I have to. He's like, damn it, Qui-Gon, you're always going against us. I'm like, oh, it'd be nice to have seen that at any point in this movie before this moment.
Yeah, I especially love, he's just like, I'll train him on my own if I have to. And it's like, bro, you already have Obi-Wan. It's like, Obi-Wan's old enough. He can take the test. And everyone's like, I mean, I can, but I don't want to step on anybody's toes here.
I'm ready to cut my rat's tail off.
Yeah. Even by the end of it, I checked at the very last shot of the movie. He still has it. I don't know when he got around to that.
Yeah, so Anakin has one at the end as well. He gets a haircut and he gets his little rat tail.
Yep.
Oh dear. So, they're basically saying no, and Qui-Gon's being stubborn about it. Meanwhile, the one thing that Palpatine has accomplished by the end of this movie is that, because of what's going on with the Trade Federation and Naboo, we should really ask for a new senator. Maybe he could suggest someone. And then later on, we find out that Palpatine is now the Chancellor. That's basically what all this was. It was a political move to give him more power in the Senate. That's what it was. Absolutely.
But this is where I was really hating the Amidala character, the Padme as Queen, because she was able to be pushed around so easily. Because maybe this is directing, maybe this is acting, I don't know. But if you watch Ian McDiarmid playing Palpatine here, he's literally just giving her horrible advice and saying the entire scene is basically saying how the bureaucrats are in charge and this chancellor who's currently there is so weak to them. They need someone more strong-willed. And he's basically phrasing as
by the way, the chancellor who's there, you'll see him briefly. He's Terrence Stamp. He's Zod from Superman. Just thought I'd mention that.
For sure. But no, he's phrasing this stuff in this way of just like, well, I suppose that you could do a vote of no confidence. And giving her side eye, I mean, if you want to, I'm not saying that, but if you want to do that, and I'm like, bro, we get it, you're evil. The whole scene is like that. And she just never catches on. She never even thinks okay, well, I'll go talk to the Chancellor myself and see what he thinks. It's laughably stupid at how easy this power grab was for Palpatine, because he's trying to do it through a 14-year-old girl.
And the funny thing is, though, is that by the end of the movie, because obviously she chooses to go back to Naboo, the Jedi have to go back with her, and they end up, obviously Qui-Gon dies, but they end up saving the day. They stop the army, they stop the droids, the Trade Federation are defeated. But Palpatine's got his new position in the Senate anyway, and it does it makes you kind of realize, wait, all of the actual plot in this movie about them invading Naboo didn't really matter that much, because it's not contributed anything to Palpatine's rise to becoming emperor and changing things. Obviously it affected his political move, right? But it didn't matter, because it's not like his plan was to always just not care if the other stuff went through, right? Obviously he created the thing, this conflict, right? He put the idea in the Trade Federation's head, and they've went through with all this, and he's used it to make a power play. But even towards the end of the movie, after he seemingly is getting that power, he's still on the phone to them, saying, hey, do this, do that, don't lose this fight. He still seems to care. And then then the good guys win, right? They stop the invasion and they stop the occupation. That's all good. So after the end of the movie, it's like, well, none of that really mattered all that much then, because he technically lost all that, but he still got the new position in the Senate, so who cares?
I mean, I took it... Again, this is with the knowledge of later movies of what they ended up doing, so I can't say it's specifically this one movie.
Sure.
But I took it a lot more from the idea of he had a plan that really would have helped if the Trade Federation had been able to control Naboo, because it would have put him in even more of like a victim stance. He could go before the Senate and say, like, my planet is occupied. I need more and more power. Keep giving it to me. But all he needed was that Supreme Chancellor position. So regardless of them losing Naboo, he still got what he wanted. So it was kind of him planning for both scenarios where he's able to come out on top regardless. But yeah, in the singular movie, it's weird that he was pushing so hard to control the planet if it didn't really matter.
Here's the thing, though. See, if they'd actually made that clear before it happened, then I could buy that explanation. If they set up this whole thing where we actually see him talking to them, or talking to Darth Maul or whoever, and explaining, we need this to happen so I gain more power. If we got to this point at the end where they lose, and he's like, but wait a minute, I already got the extra power in the Senate, so I guess this worked out anyway. That would have been fine, because at least it would have said, okay, it didn't work out the way that he'd planned it, but he got lucky, effectively. And
yeah, we needed a sequence, because Darth Maul's dead, we needed a sequence where somehow he talks to the Viceroys again on the hologram, and he says, they're just like apologizing profusely. They're like, oh, we're so sorry we lost the planet, please don't hurt us. And he's like, no matter, everything has still gone as it needed to, and we'll do what we need to get the power back.
Yeah, so the entire central conflict of the movie was uninteresting the entire time as it was playing out, but at the end it also felt like it wasn't actually that important in the grand scheme of things. I mean, this movie, obviously the main thing that it wanted to do was introduce Anakin, get him hooked up with Obi-Wan by the end, and set us on that path. And then the other plot, I guess the point of it was really to set the path of Palpatine to Emperor kind of thing. But it's so undercooked that I'm like, you could have just not done any of that and made a more focused movie about meeting Anakin and doing, like, make the entire movie be set on Tatooine about, like, freeing all the slaves or something. That would at least be worthwhile. You could understand that. You could empathize with that really easily, because you're saving innocent people from slavery. Easy.
Here's where I think this is a problem, that it's called Star Wars. I think that there's this expectation where there has to be some sort of intergalactic fight going on to earn the title. Like, having him free the slaves, yeah, that's a good idea. That's great and all. But there needs to be an army behind it. There needs to be some sort of, like, government against government thing going on for it to classify as a Star War.
Well, that's dumb. That's stupid. That does not matter.
I'm not disagreeing. Especially because in the Disney era of it, we get so many spin-off movies and stuff like that that do well that don't have that. So clearly it shouldn't be a matter, but I think George was kind of felt like he was beholden to it.
Oh dear. So Padme, as we said earlier, after these meetings with the Senate and whatnot, she's like, hey, we're going back to Naboo, and everyone is like, that's a bad idea. Why would we do that? We don't have an army to fight them with. Like, I don't care, I'm going. And it's basically just because, two Jedi and this, like, Wunderkind, or Wunderkind, I should say, is going to just, like, save the day. That's I mean, even then, Qui-Gon specifically says, like, yo, we're peacekeepers, man. I'm here for defense. I'm not going to fight a war for you. And I think it does come back to the conversation she had with Jar Jar, where Jar Jar says, we got big army in Gungan City. Yeah, and I mean, that's just the wheels turning, where she's like, we're going to go back, we're going to get the Gungans, and we're going to fight against the Federation. That's eventually what it turns into, but I feel like when she's initially adamant she wants to go back, that plan's not in place yet, so it just sounds like she's being dumb. It sounds like, why would you want to go back? You can't fight this. And then later on, the idea of, we make a deal with the Gundams, the Gungans? Gungans? Who gives a shit? Right?
One's a giant robot from Japan, and the other is these things.
They go to the Gungans, and basically it takes, like, honestly, a surprisingly quick amount of convincing to get them on board. And when I say get them on board, not only are they agreeing to be allies, they're basically saying, yeah, it's our army, and Qui-Gon even points out a lot of Gungans are going to die in this, and the leader guy is just like, oh, we're committed. I'm like, you just joined this alliance like 10 minutes ago, and you're like, yeah, we're okay if 10,000 of our people die. What?
Oh, yeah. My favorite part about this is the fact that they say like, okay, you're going to fight them out in this big open field. Droids that are able to walk on flat land very easily. And then you guys who are amphibious and would have clearly the upper hand in a water fight. But we're going to set it out in this big field because...
We're going to set out in a big field so we can have something that quite literally looks like an RTS game with the armies approaching each other, because it's all CG anyway. So it looks like all the military troops coming towards each other and the big wide shots. That's what it looks like. You
just know that George Lucas was like in the back room at the Lucas Games office, and he was like, now guys, can you make a turn-based strategy game if I give you a single scene for that?
So, yeah, I mean, honestly, all those war scenes between the droids and the Gungans is whatever.
I mean, I'll just say all the plots real quick. Plot 1 is all the Gungans are out in the field, along with Jar Jar, who's been made a general now because screw it. And then everyone else makes their way to the palace in order to get to the viceroys and do whatever. And then they're also going to send up a armada into space to take out the drone control ship in order to stop the Gungans from dying from an unlimited amount of droids. But then when they get to the palace, immediately they're beset upon, and they're like, okay, cool, we fought off the first wave. Anakin is now safe inside of a ship. Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon come up against Darth Maul, and they're like, well, clearly this is meant for us. We're going to split off from the group there. And then Padme's group just tries to make their way to the throne room in order to get to the viceroys and take them out of play. So that's like 4 plots going all at once.
Yeah, the Trade Federation guys, that's what they're trying to get to. Anakin, he says in a ship, specifically he's in like a fighter. It's like a small fighter ship.
Starfighter,
which ends up turning on an autopilot and takes him up out of the fight. So he ends up doing some pod racing skills through their ship. And he's the one
Not just any skills. Yeah. Spinning is a cool trick.
But he's the one that ends up destroying the droid control ship, which then stops the war down on the planet. And all this is happening, but the main thing that most of the audience is probably interested in is the lightsaber fight. It's Maul versus the 2 Jedi. Okay, I don't think this fight's that good for a couple of reasons, right? One, I think it is just overly choreographed. It's more like a dance than it is a fight. I don't feel any emotion in it or passion. I don't think Darth Maul's been built up enough to actually care that he's this much of a threat. That's actually the biggest surprising thing about watching this again, after having not seen it in 20 years, is just how little effort is actually put into setting him up or making him have a presence where we actually give a shit that he's there. Like, literally, it all comes down to he has some cool face paint and he's got a double lightsaber. That's it. It's as thin as it could possibly be. And
yeah, but I gotta tell you, like, as a 6-year-old, it worked. Like, I was like, yes, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life.
And also, Qui-Gon's death here feels really, like, lame as a death. Like, it feels like, it's just like, he just kicks his hand and stabs him with a lightsaber. It's that simple. After all these moves, after all this jumping up and down platforms and all these other things that they're doing during this big set piece, the one interesting bit is maybe when the force fields like come up and they have to like pause the fight because they can't go through the force fields. It's like the one part where it felt like, okay, they're playing with an idea here to break up the fight and make it interesting, where it cuts off one of them from the other two, and like you can see the difference in how Darth Maul paces as he's waiting versus Qui-Gon meditating when he's waiting for the laser, the force field to go up. Like, that's a fine little idea on its own. But you know, I just, there's just not that many stakes in the fight. All things considered.
I mean, that's the thing is, obviously, the idea is, okay, this is a Sith Lord. We want to kill them because they want to kill us. And it's just a fight to that. But ultimately, this fight has no bearing at all on the entire rest of this, like, fighting for control of Naboo thing. It's its own completely separate thing entirely.
It has nothing to do with the rest of the movie's plot, really, all things considered. It has no impact on the future of Star Wars, really, other than the fact that Qui-Gon's not around. But we didn't know he existed before this movie either, so it's not like that matters.
Yeah, that's fair.
And honestly, it can't, like, Darth Maul, you've given him this cool look, you're setting him up as being the new villain for this trilogy, and then you kill him off at the end of the first movie. It kind of makes the Sith look like a bunch of tits. Like, this was easy. This was so easy.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a problem that they back themselves into, where you have the Emperor is clearly still the Emperor in episode like 6 or whatever. There's no way that you can set up any sort of, either the Emperor has to be the apprentice in these opening scenes, which then doesn't make sense that he's making such a massive power grab.
No, that's not what I'm suggesting is that Darth Maul should have been around for the second movie, right? If you have to do these movies,
all 3 movies, yeah.
And I'll even say all 3. I would say 2. I would say you have Anakin probably, or maybe Obi-Wan, whoever, right? Either one, right? You have one of them beat him at the end of Attack of the Clones, if you still call it that, right? You have one of them beat him, and you effectively sort of line up the progression of Anakin becoming Darth Vader with the fact that the Emperor's just lost his apprentice and needs a new apprentice. And you kind of link that up. But as it stands, Darth Maul's gone when Anakin's like 10 years old, and it's going to be another, 12 years or whatever it is until the Darth Vader transition actually happens. But you can kind of maybe line those two things up. Like, not that it happens right away, but the idea that, now Palpatine has an extra reason to go, prodding and like, talking in his ear and but trying to mold him to his way and like turn him to the dark side because now he needs a new apprentice. And maybe if Anakin is the one that kills him, he goes, I'll have him then. He's clearly the better of the two, right?
Yeah.
Darth Maul was a failure. Anakin can be the true apprentice and be the true evil guy.
I mean, without going too deep into it, that's kind of what happens with Dooku in episode 2 and 3. Like, but yeah, he's not set up here.
But you could have just let it be Darth Maul so that when he shows up in the second one, he's at least been introduced already and it feels established so we can develop him a bit further.
Yeah, I think it needed to be a situation where we wanted this to end with the same sort of like, and we did it. The day is saved. And like, if you're looking back to New Hope and just doing the parallels between it, you have the mentor character dying, the secondary character is coming into their own and like manages to save the day. And then the good side needs to have a decisive win over the bad side. And I think if Maul gets away, there's no way that you can really have that. I think that Maul had to die here for that.
I think it's a false...
Oh yeah, you don't need to do the parallels at all.
If anything, it makes more sense to inverse it. You have the first movie end in a downer because Qui-Gon dies and Maul gets away. The second movie, inversing from the original trilogy, is the one with the kind of happier ending because maybe, say, Anakin levels up and takes out Darth Maul and it feels like the good guys win in the second movie this time. And then the third movie, obviously, is his fall to becoming Darth Vader and the true sort of, like, so you inverse it. Instead of having good guys win, bad guys strike back, good guys ultimately win at the end. Because this time it's a tragedy because it's all about this guy becoming the villain, you start off with bad things happen, hope that good things maybe happen in the middle, someone wins, and then third movie, ultimate, dark ending, it's a tragedy, this is the lowest point because this is what sets up the original trilogy. If you and again, this is all under the idea that we have to make these movies because frankly, I would say you shouldn't, it should have never happened, leave it be.
I mean, I think that there's kind of a idea, especially with introducing new IPs and stuff like that, where the first movie always should be this own like standalone thing, just in case the sequels don't get greenlit.
Yeah, for sure.
And so it needs to have like a happier ending. But then, if you want to make, the second one a downer and then end with the final triumphant thing, that's a good format. It works. It's a decent storytelling. But I think that you're right. George Lucas, he knew he was getting all 3 out of this.
Yeah, I mean,
there's no way he just makes episode 1 and says, all right, that's it, guys, bye.
This is Star Wars. Like, he could have used the carte blanche, like, you can do what you want, to truly try something interesting and different, something that you couldn't do with a normal movie project. And instead, it's just this hodgepodge of underdeveloped crap. Like, that's all it is. It's here. We're going to, like, say, this is where C-3PO comes from. This is where R2-D2 comes from. This is, Anakin, and he's special. He's the chosen one. He's important already before anything's even happened. It's just a bunch of stuff that I don't like. And this is on top of every other complaint we've levied at this for its visuals, for its direction, for its dull characters. All of it.
Honestly, I think that the best way to change this movie and make it have kind of like a more downer ending is make the central theme of it the idea of loss of innocence. Set up more the fact that Queen Amidala is this very young queen, and she doesn't have a lot of experience, and now she's faced with this invasion of her home planet. Play more on the idea that Anakin's having to give up his entire life, his mother and whatnot, and also Obi-Wan just lost his master as well. Play up that they had like almost a father-son bond, or at least closer to brothers, and when that's gone, how much it deeply affects him. Show this younger generation that George Lucas has already established we're going to be following through the next two movies, and show that this is the moment where their lives change and reach that more of a downer moment.
You suggesting that, the start of your suggestion there did pose an interesting question to me that I'm going to fire back at you. Mm-hmm. What is the central theme of this movie? Exactly. Because that would actually be good. See, if there actually was a central theme that the movie was clearly trying to be about the whole time, even if it had some faults and things weren't perfect, at least if it was there was clearly like a theme that it was going for, that would be something. But it doesn't. There isn't a central theme to this film. There isn't a central thing that it's trying to say, or a central idea.
The central idea is we're setting up for the rest of the trilogy. Yeah. That's it.
Because you look at Star Wars, like there's influence obviously from other movies and like serials and stuff like that, but also the fact that the heroes are the rebels who don't have all the tech, who are having to use guerrilla tactics. It's talking about Vietnam. It's basically saying, hey, maybe America were the bad guys in Vietnam. There's subtext to actually what it's saying in that movie.
Yeah.
I don't know if there is subtext here, and if there is, like I don't know enough about whatever subject all these Trade Federation taxation disputes are about. Obviously, the key thing to try and relate it to would be any kind of like someone like working their way up to seize power, right? Like some sort of political history. But I don't know if there's anything that directly correlates with anything.
Oh, I'm sure that you could find something in like the Nazis or something like that. Like
probably
German post-war economy.
I mean, to be fair,
like, look at how much they're taxing us into.
Some of the Empire officer uniforms were directly based on Nazi uniforms. Like that's like not a secret. Like, so there was definitely some of that there. It wouldn't be completely out of line to suggest that Palpatine, not that he's characteristically like Hitler by any means, but just the idea that he's moving the pawns around and he's gaining power in ways so that he can eventually enact his version of what the Empire should be. But anyway, they want to mirror the original movie, so they have like a parade at the end of Naboo, because now the Gungans and the main people of Naboo are all united and together.
I'm sure they have an actual name, but I've been calling in my head Naboobians.
Yes. So yes, they're all united for the first time now, and that just so we can end on a happy note and we can go to the directed by George Lucas credit, which is almost just like a, I don't know, just a final insult. Like the ugly truth behind it all. It was directed by George Lucas, because the original Star Wars, like the story goes that it was like saved in editing. Like, obviously he created a lot of things in that movie that he should be commended for, but it was a mess until someone did a good job editing it, and it's kind of a miracle it turned out as well as it did. And then, other people directed Empire and Jedi. So,
I think George Lucas should be given all the credit for the original concept. I think that is 100% on him. Great job. You did it with space wizards and the Force and all that stuff. Good job. But I think that the best things to come out of Star Wars past his initial concept, none of which are like attributed to him. I think that he had a good like initial idea. Maybe the treatments were like there the whole time, but I think that like Empire Strikes Back, like half of the reveals that happened there were not in the original idea George had. They came after like the edit changed things in New Hope, and obviously his ideas then had to change based off of it. So I think giving George Lucas almighty power to do whatever he wanted here is just kind of a ignoring history and saying, oh yeah, he was the guy who made all of Star Wars, right? Ignoring everything else that went in behind it.
It goes back to what I said earlier. He's not an auteur. And he never was. And I think, I'm not saying that it would have worked out if it was all based on an auteur, because auteurs can fail, they can blunder, they can get too up their own ass. It's entirely possible. But I would trust, I don't know, what's I trying to give an example?
Tommy Wiseau.
I don't know, like if I don't know, maybe a good example is David Lynch coming back and doing 18 episodes of Twin Peaks all these years later, but it was unique and it had its own thing to say, and it was clearly coming from this place of passion and artistic pursuit, and it felt like, oh, he's not just rehashing what he did before. It's one of the reasons why it feels so special. Or if I mean, even look at the Avatar movies, right? James Cameron, right? Obviously not everyone loves those movies. Some people think they're a bit generic in some ways, but you can't deny when you watch those movies that he clearly cares about this and he's building to something, right? It's not just like, because they're not prequels to something else and because he's not tying into something else, he's just building his own lore. And maybe it's not as iconic as these other things because we've already had other sci-fi worlds and we've already had all these other things. But, you know, Avatar and Avatar Way of the Water are far better than these Star Wars prequels, and it's not even, like, you know, close.
No,
So, you know, he just isn't that guy. And I think maybe getting other people to direct these movies, having someone else to like do a redraft of the scripts would have done wonders. It may not have solved every problem, but it would have done wonders for like the characterizations, I bet. For other people having input in what the actors are doing would have probably done wonders.
Would have definitely been at least 3 less yippies, which win in my book.
Yeah, there's so many things. And obviously part of this, like, yeah, I don't find Star Wars' world as appealing as other sci-fi worlds. I do prefer Trek. I do prefer something like Mass Effect or The Expanse. But I can still love Star Wars. That original trilogy is great. But, it's not great because of all the details in the background of the world that it's built for me. It's great for the things that are just entirely missing from almost everything from Star Wars since.
Right, yeah.
And, you know, they almost had it back a little bit with the sequel trilogy because they give us, you know, it's okay, these characters are a bit nice, fun, more fun, and they may have this ongoing chemistry or whatever. It fails in other ways eventually, but, you know, that's future discussion. We'll get to that when we get to that. So all I can say before Attack of the Clones is that I remember it being painfully boring when I saw it at the age of 13, 14. So we'll see how I feel going back.
I mean, having seen it more than you have, I know you're going to hate it more because it's George Lucas saying, yeah, I can do a romance.
Oh, yeah, it's the one with the sand. Like, oh, I hate sand. Yeah, it's the romance. All I remember from this is that everyone says you shouldn't be in a romance together, but we're going to send you to a planet, like a beautiful planet on your own. And then Padme, who also says she doesn't want a romance, comes to dinner wearing a dominatrix outfit. That's what I remember about that movie. So we'll see.
It was really, really brave of the Jedi Council to say, hey, no romantic things, no any of that. Now here's your box of condoms. Get out of here.
No romance, but here, go and stay in a place where there's beautiful waterfalls behind you the whole time, and just lovely, beautiful scenery all around.
Yeah, and then he goes and takes her to meet his parents. So really worked out there.
All right, that's for Attack of the Clones. I don't know when we're doing that, by the way. We only pushed this forward because it was the anniversary. So we might get to Attack of the Clones by the end of the year. I'm in no rush.
If we're going by anniversaries, we're looking at 2002, 2027. I'm cool with that.
I'd love that, but I've got a feeling there'll be a Star Wars movie before then.
Damn.
I mean, maybe not. I may actually be pushing it close.
Yeah, we'll see.
Well, there's none in 2025. We actually know that for a fact. The earliest one might come out is 2026. So,
can Disney hold off on their greed until then? The answer is always no.
I mean, they're working on at least 3 or 4 that might eventually come out, but everything's kind of been in development. I won't say hell, but just sort of up in the air ever since Rise of Skywalker came out, I should say.
They were like, why didn't our meddling make a better movie? God.
Oh, dear. Okay. I will say this. When we get to Rise of Skywalker eventually, that movie in some ways worse than the prequels, but for different reasons. And it'll be a fascinating comparison to make. Because all of this, for everything we have said, at least it's one person's vision. As bad as it is kind of on him. It's on him and what he wanted to do.
No, I agree. And especially it's someone who has every incentive to making it work. They have every incentive to like recognizing their vision as they wanted to, rather than just, oh, I want the money, you know?
Although apparently he was quoted on set, I think there was a clip of this in the Red Letter Media review of George on set saying, "Oh, we're never going to beat Titanic," because presumably when they were shooting the movie, Titanic was breaking all the records at the box office. Like, I thought I was going to come out and break all the records with my new Star Wars movie, but I think Titanic's like, sorry, James Cameron came out and beat you to it, Georgie boy.
Look, as we've learned, nobody can beat James Cameron except for James Cameron.
Yeah, honestly,
that's pretty much it.
I don't think I've ever had more fun following box office news than like at the end of 2009, start of 2010, when like, wait, this movie's like possibly going to like rival. Oh no, it is beating Titanic. How? How is he doing this? How? Nothing has even come close to beating Titanic at that point, and now he's going to do it with his very next movie. What?
Yep,
that was wild. Anyway, let's rate Phantom Menace.
Oh God, I really should have been thinking about this, shouldn't I? All right, so the basis point is a 5, where 5 is the difference between like recommend and don't recommend. So
well, it's not 5 then.
No, I wouldn't put it at a 5. So how far down does it sink? I'm gonna say 4.
Okay.
I don't think it's that far down. I mean, I'm not going to go that deep into the reasons why a 4, just listen to the rest of the review, but I think that there is still enough here in terms of like what they were at least trying to do that could like work. And again, some people, that final fight scene really works for them. I'm more on Pete's side in that it just seems more flash than bang, but I think there are elements to it that do somewhat work, but for the vast majority of it, it's just a big old, like, you're here for maybe 3 scenes total. The rest of the movie is just useless fodder.
Yep. This is tough. Looking back in the day, it seems like 4's what I've rated it in the past. This did feel like it was worse this time than what I remembered.
Okay.
But at the same time, I'm expecting to go lower.
Yeah.
With the next one.
Can't give it a 0 if the next one's a -1.
Nah, I wouldn't go as. I mean, it's not a 1, it's not a 2. I can make an argument for a 3. It's such a layered movie to talk about because it's like all these things that are just individually wrong with it, and then you've got all the prequel-y problems that are wrong with it. You got all the technical problems that are wrong with it. It's kind of, and then just like how it handles its characters and everything else. Yeah, I'm going 3 out of 10.
Okay.
I think it is just straight up a really bad movie, and that's kind of, if 4 is bad, 3 is really bad, 2 is dog shit, and then 1 is like special kind of disaster.
Just as a comparison, last week, we haven't recorded this yet, but last week was Rebel Moon Part 2. You gave Rebel Moon Part 1 a 3. So
yeah, that's fair. I mean, to be fair, they're bad for different reasons. Like, not all 3s are 3s for the same, issues. Like, there's more than one way to be crap.
Oh yeah, absolutely. All right, so do the Patreon bits because I very quickly want to go through my homework.
Oh
yes, this is a long one.
Yes. So yeah, you could get some bonus shows over in Patreon. Obviously, there's bonus shows that me and Tim do for Screams After Midnight, but if you're specifically wanting more of me and David, you can get access to 2 monthly shows. We got the Criterion Cut, where we review movies from the Criterion Collection, some of the best stuff ever made. And at the $5 tier and up, we also do movies on extra reels, which are some of the worst movies ever made. Hopefully so bad that they're good. We've done Neil Breen, we've done Miami Connection, we've done Dangerous Men,
Mac and
Me is a big heavy hitter. Troll 2, I'm sure, is out by this point. So
yep.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing on there. So if you want to hear us, if you enjoyed watching us talk about a bad movie, then you can get a lot more of it on extra reels.
Oh boy.
So yeah. But yes, every episode, David goes back and watches a movie that me and Tara did before he joined the show to catch up on all the sci-fi that he missed or just feels like he needs to rewatch. So,
yep.
I mean, I think you implied it earlier what it was, but what movie did you do for homework, David?
Well, back when we did Rebel Moon, I did New Hope, and I will say, if you don't want to revisit that, I did not actually have time to go back and watch New Hope.
Oh, okay.
Like, I just didn't have time because it was a new release. I had to record it quickly.
Does that mean you watched both A New Hope and Empire?
I watched, both New Hope and Empire back to back. Got them both out of the way, and Jesus, that gave Phantom Menace like no ground to stand on. No, I mean, just keeping it very brief here, I think Empire is fantastic. I think that I am in the camp that's going to put Empire slightly above New Hope.
Many do.
Yeah, I'm basic bitch like that. I think that it is a fantastically well done movie, and I think the part that kept on getting me was that New Hope, maybe it's just because it is now a classic, it is something that everyone is aware of, but I did feel like the beats were very predictable the whole way through. I felt like I was always like on top of like, okay, yeah, they're setting this up, forecasting this way far out. With Empire, despite the fact that I knew the story, as I was watching the individual beats, it still kept on surprising me. Like, it actually managed the part where, I guess spoilers somewhat, but a part where we meet Lando at the end, and Lando's just basically walking him through the city being like, oh yeah, the Empire leaves us alone, and I just made a deal that's gonna make that permanent or whatnot. I'm just like, yeah, okay, sounds cool. And then it just immediately leads into a he's betrayed them sort of thing. And I'm like, oh, there was nothing in this that telegraphed it as heavily as like New Hope did. It really kept it close to the chest. And I think that having it be stereotypically one of the ends on a downer films, it ends with the bad guys essentially winning. I think it does a great job at really playing with expectations there, because every time you think that like the good guys are going to come out on top, it just gets thrown back in their face over and over again. So I really did enjoy the rewatch on that. It worked for it. And then cinematography was great. Darth Vader, I think this is where Darth Vader really came into the idea of how people know him. Because if you watch him in New Hope, he's very loud and angry, like all the time. Every once in a while, he'll calm down and do like the menacing voice. But for the most part, he's very like, I want them found alive sort of stuff. This one is where he's throwing out the cold one-liners and just choking people across intercoms. And I think this is where Darth Vader really comes into his own as a cultural icon. So all that being said, I'm not going to give it the perfect 10. I do think that there are just enough in it that like I think that the entire subplot with Han and Leia, especially since they're separated from Luke, but the entire subplot with them trying to outrun the Empire through this asteroid field is essentially useless, because it begins and ends with the Empire hot on their tails. So it's like their entire plot throughout the movie is essentially just wasting time.
It's just funny because the subplot I don't like that much is all the stuff in Dagobah.
Dagobah, yeah. So yeah, I think both sides lose a little bit there, but it is interesting enough to the world as a whole that I'm still going to give it a 9.5 to match it with New Hope.
Okay, very good. All right, well, next week on the show, if all goes to plan, we'll be talking about another new release. We'll be looking at Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. Yep. So look forward to that. And you can go check out all our past reviews of Planet of the Apes. I did the old ones with Tara. Me and David did the new trilogy recently, spread out over a few months. Go check out all those. But that is the show, everyone. Thank you very much. This is the third 2.5-hour episode that we've done in the span of a few weeks, recording-wise. So hopefully you've enjoyed them. But thank you for joining us once again. We always appreciate it. Keep watching science fiction and computer at Salsa.